Prologue. 10 hut. The officer barked the order, and Marek Stele pulled back his shoulders and squared his chest. The officer pinned a medal onto Marek's uniform, gave a salute, right hand against left breast, which Marek returned, then swiveled as if on gimbals, striding off to pin another pilot. Marek avoided thinking of Morden, and his thoughts wandered. Ultimately, a familiar image came to mind. It was the Star Destroyer Vengeance. The first time he had seen it, the Star Destroyer had seemed the symbol of a new life and of the power and grandeur of the Empire. How different it all looked now. But then, perhaps a month had passed since the incident with the Bordali. He was still a civilian, working in the repairs section of the Star Destroyer. It was his first shakedown flight, a chance to take a repaired TIE fighter on a test run outside. He had been learning the controls from the veterans in repairs, and they liked him enough to give him a turn in the cockpit. In combat, the TIE fighters were ejected through an automated system, but in repairs, they had to guide the craft through the hangar on repulsor lifts, then out the airlock on engine power. The fidgety repulsors on most TIE fighters made this maneuver difficult at best, but Marek quite enjoyed the challenge. It reminded him of his early days racing swoops. That first moment in the dark stillness of space, Marek had gasped and his head reeled. Stretching off beyond sight and into the richness of his imagination, the galaxy spread out before him. To either side was a vast metal world. Though he had been aware that the Vengeance was an Imperial Star Destroyer, his mind had never reconciled its vastness with the idea of a spaceship. Now he felt compressed, a mote, a mere particle, and even the Star Destroyer, grand as it was, seemed momentarily bounded by its limited scope. Soon, the incomprehensibility of seeing space from the inside of a tiny starfighter forced Marek to turn his attention reluctantly to something closer at hand, the Vengeance. It was then that the real immensity of the Star Destroyer reasserted itself in his mind. "This is Margaret. Stele, you there?" The crackly voice blared in his ear, reproaching his almost spiritual awe. "I'm here," Marek replied after a moment of silence. He had to search for and finally activate his voice, which sounded small and distant. "First time's a bit of a shocker, eh?" Margaret's voice was affable. "Sorry to cut you short, but the old tub's hyperspace warning came on a moment ago."
"Better come back in. It's a long ride to the nearest planetary base." The thought of being stranded here in the middle of nothing at all was instantly sobering. Marek snapped to full awareness. He pulled the TF around and headed back to the airlock, but not without taking one last, longing look at the Star Destroyer and the tapestry of stars surrounding it. If he had seen little of the outside of the Star Destroyer in his first month, he didn't get to see much of the inside of the huge ship either. Most of it was restricted to military personnel, and whole sections were classified. What he had seen, the civilian barracks and supply centers, the repair hangars, and a few offices in admin, had all reinforced the image that he was stationed on a military installation planetside. Only the fact that he had been told he was aboard a ship contradicted that impression, and he often had doubts that he was being told the truth.
For he had become aware that the Imperials were in many ways a haughty bunch, full of their own righteousness and superiority. He was sure they would not hesitate to tell a civilian conscript like himself any lie that furthered their own ends. Except for Admiral Morden. Now that was an enigma. Morden, the senior officer aboard the Vengeance, was in some ways the most human. He had obviously taken a liking to Marek. But of course that had come later, after Marek had come to his aid during the rebel attack. "Come see me any time," he had said. "My door is always open." And he had given Marek the strangest password to use. "There's a fog over Celadon City." It had struck Marek as odd that the senior officer aboard so great a ship should bother with a lowly pilot. But in a short time, Marek became a sort of surrogate son to the Admiral, or so it seemed. And here he was, receiving another medal for his service to the Empire. He had become a top pilot, fought in many battles, and he had learned that all is not as it seems. 1. Early training. Marek began his pilot's training aboard the Vengeance. Of course, like all new pilot trainees, he had a lot to learn, and not all of it involved being inside the cockpit of a starfighter. On his first day back from boot camp, he was handed several hollows and told to be sure he was familiar with them. Once he had found his new quarters in the pilot's wing of the great Star Destroyer, Marek had popped in the hollow. He studied it until his eyes grew heavy and he slept dreamlessly. "You Cadet Stele?" A pair of troopers stood near the simulator. "I'm Stele," Marek acknowledged. "Come with us," the first trooper said. Puzzled, Marek followed as the two troopers led him out of the simulator complex, through the concourse, and into one of the main tunnels aboard the Star Destroyer. There, they motioned him to board a skimmer, one of the small hovercarts that were often used to cover the large distances within the Star Destroyer, especially when speed was important. At just around 1,600 meters in length, going from one end of the Star Destroyer to the other could take time, and many of the pathways through the ship were anything but straight. Marek kept his silence, as did the troopers, but he wondered why his training had been interrupted. Had he done something wrong? Even though he was now a legitimate member of the Imperial Navy, he retained some uneasiness about his presence aboard the Star Destroyer and his place within the Empire. Had they found some defect in his character, or discovered some secret he didn't know he had? They rode up several floors on a large elevator, and soon it became apparent that they were heading toward the bridge. Marek had never been on the bridge of the Vengeance. Few non-bridge personnel were ever invited there, and Marek saw no reason why he should be an exception. He did not see the bridge this time either. They turned off the main tunnel, then wound around through several other tunnels, ending up in a small hallway that stretched off into the distance. The troopers halted the hovercart and climbed down. "This way," said the one that talked. The other remained silent, but his eyes were watchful. They led Marek to a plain hatch. It had no markings and was indistinguishable from many similar hatches in hallways all over the ship. The troopers halted the hovercart and climbed down. Marek had no idea how they even knew this was the right one. The hatch irised open, and the troopers motioned Marek to enter. His heart skipped a beat. What awaited him inside? It was mysterious. Inside, he was assaulted by the color green. There were plants everywhere. There was also a pleasant, though unfamiliar scent. It smelled vaguely like the shimsa flower from Marek's home planet, Kuan, but there was another scent mixed in, like pepper or bentherberry tea. The air was thick, and Marek realized that it was very humid. From somewhere, Marek heard the sound of running water. It was as if he stood on a planet somewhere, not in the middle of the metal hulk of a Star Destroyer. Amid the greenery, Marek began to notice the brightly colored flowers, ranging from vivid pink to dusky orange. A few were tinged with lavender or aquamarine. They were thick, almost fleshy, and seemed to shiver in the dampness. Marek noticed that each flower he observed was pointed directly at him. He was about to move to investigate one of the flowers when Morden spoke. "Do you like my little retreat?" the Admiral asked. With a start, Marek realized that the Admiral was standing close by, partially camouflaged by a great green bush almost twice his height. Before Marek could answer, the Admiral continued. "Come, Cadet Stele, join me for a few moments." He beckoned Marek to follow him and walked back into the jungle was the only appropriate word. Marek followed hesitantly. He noticed that the flowers remained facing him, even when he moved. So fascinated was he with the flowers that he failed to notice the small waterfall and the table and chairs nearby until he had nearly stumbled into one of the chairs. "Have a seat," said Morden with a slight chuckle. Off balance, Marek did as he was told and plopped ungracefully into the chair. He felt foolish, but was too overwhelmed to care. How could such a natural garden exist on the Star Destroyer? It seemed somehow out of place in the imperial scheme of things. As if in answer, Morden said, "Most Star Destroyer admirals have their eccentricities. Some collect artifacts, some have elaborate hollow units designed to simulate whatever they desire to experience. For me, I grew up on a planet full of natural beauty. I come here to think, to find my own brand of solitude." Finally, Marek found his voice. "It's beautiful, sir." Morden laughed. "And you're probably wondering why I had you brought here," he stated. Once again, this was the foremost thought in Marek's mind. He nodded. "Sir?" The Admiral reached over and poured a steaming liquid into 2 cups and gestured for Marek to take one. As Marek tasted the biting liquid, Morden sat quietly, his eyes closed and his breathing very even. When he began to speak again, his voice was slow and seemed slightly distant. "Let's say you remind me of someone. Also, you did me a favor once, and I'd like to repay it. Or maybe I want something more from you." Morden's eyes opened slightly. Instantly, Marek was suspicious, and he felt himself grow very still. The steaming cup burned his hand, but he remained frozen in place. What did it mean when an admiral wanted a favor of a raw cadet? But Morden either didn't notice Marek's sudden wariness, or he chose to ignore it. "I am a very good judge of character, Stengel. Can I call you Marek?" He didn't pause for an answer, but continued as if the question required none. "I think you have certain qualities that I want to encourage." He closed his eyes again, and there was silence other than the sound of water splashing on rock. Marek waited, noticing that the flowers were still pointed directly at him. Only at him, not at the Admiral. Suddenly, Martin seemed to come alive again. "So, Marek, how are you doing in the simulators? Your reports are excellent." Slightly startled, Marek answered without thinking, "Simulators are fine, I guess, sir, but not like the real thing." Morden smiled. "Of course not, but you must be patient. What you learn there may preserve your life." "Yes, sir." Everyone said the same thing. "And how do you like your new role as a citizen and soldier of the Empire?" Morden asked. After weeks of silence and keeping his own counsel, Marek surprised himself by answering honestly. "I've seen very little so far. The Empire is as good as any political system, I suppose, bringing order and prosperity to the galaxy and all, but I don't know. Anyway, what really interests me is finding out what happened to my father." As soon as he blurted it out, he wished he hadn't said anything. But Morden only said, "Ah, the scientist." Marek sat uncomfortably for a moment, feeling acutely observed. Then Morden spoke again. His voice was low. If Marek hadn't known better, he would have called it conspiratorial. "There are some things you cannot talk about with the people around you, but it is necessary to tell someone," he stated. "All is not as it seems within the Empire, Cadet Stele. There are mysteries and events seen dimly in the fog." The mood passed suddenly. "Finish your tea, Marek, and come see me again soon." The Admiral stood up and started to leave. Casually, he handed Marek a small ring, a simple band with an oval-shaped disc of metal on the top. "Wear this until you get outside, then give it to the troopers. Don't put it down." The stern warning confused Marek, but the Admiral was already leaving, and he had no chance to ask why not. He quickly finished his drink and made his way back to the hatch and the bleak but familiar metal halls of the Star Destroyer. The sound of running water, so rare aboard the Star Destroyer, came to be the symbol of those times Marek spent with Morden. There was sometimes food, delicacies from worlds Marek had never even heard of. Always there was the spicy tea, and always there was conversation. Morden heard Marek's whole story, about the war with Bordel, the disappearance of his father, his swoop victories. He found it easy to talk amid the greenery and the water sounds and the tea. It was a relief. Conversation was not one-sided, however. Morden talked often about his past. He described the planet of his origins and the exceptional flora and fauna of his homeland. "Yes, these flowers are somewhat unusual," he said one day. "I grew them from seeds I had flown from my home system. They are keyed to me. As long as I am in the room, they will not attack." Attack? Marek looked around, noticed, as always, that every flower he could see was turned toward him. "What do you mean, attack?" For once, Morden did not laugh at his obvious discomfort. "They can exude a powerful poison, killing a human almost instantly. But don't worry, you're safe as long as I am here." "But what about when you're not here? I've been here alone, too." "Yes, do you remember the ring I gave you to wear? It will tell the flowers you are a friend. Without that, you would be dead in seconds." Marek said nothing, twisted the ring on his finger, and squirmed in his seat. Suddenly he missed the barracks and his cold, hard bunk. "You are quite safe, Marek. My flowers do not make mistakes. They know friend from foe." The Admiral often told Marek stories of his early years as a cadet, or of being a pilot in old freighters and transports. "By the time I entered the Imperial Academy, I had already captained a small Corellian transport. I always believed that I was meant to explore other worlds. I never knew how much I would miss mine, though." Marek never tired of hearing stories about space combat, and Morden frequently offered advice about starfighter tactics and combat survival. "Keep your head on a swivel," he would say. "Don't let anything catch you unaware. Your single advantage is situational awareness." Another of his favorites was, "Don't forget the wingman." But by far his favorite advice was, "Don't be a hero." He would often elaborate. "Pick your moments and learn to recognize situations that will get you killed. It's all right to miss a kill if it means you'll survive to fight another day." Some of Morden's advice went contrary to what he was being taught, but Marek always knew which information would keep him alive. And that was what counted. Later, Marek consolidated some of Morden's most practical tips. At one meeting with Morden, Marek was sipping his tea when the Admiral, who had been silent for several minutes, finally spoke again. "Have you seen The Secret Order?" he asked. Marek spilled some tea. "I'm not sure what you mean, sir." Morden smiled his most mysterious grin and asked, "You've occasionally seen men dressed in robes, have you not?" "Oh, yes," answered Marek. "The acolytes." "The what?" Morden asked, sounding genuinely shocked. "At least, that's what the other cadets call them," Marek answered sheepishly. The Admiral laughed and sipped his tea. "I advise you to speak to them. They can be useful to you. And I think they prefer to be known as envoys of the Emperor." "But who are they?" Marek asked a little suspiciously. "They are members of an elite corps who look after the Emperor's business. They can be helpful and will offer you opportunities." Morden left the word opportunities hanging in the air between them. Then he added, "Don't be afraid to approach them before missions. They already know you. They are watching you." Marek felt a shudder run up and down his spine. "They seem quite unapproachable," he said after a moment. "Nevertheless, you will want to speak with them," Morden repeated. Several days later, they sat beside the waterfall, staring into the bubbling froth at its base. Neither had spoken for several minutes, and Marek's mind had wandered back home, to Kuan. He was just wondering how his mother was doing when the Admiral spoke, his voice distant, worried. "Things are getting worse," he said, then lapsed into silence again. When he spoke again, his voice was stronger and more present. "I have been studying some of the communications on the Imperial comlink, and, well, let's just say I have people who tell me things." He was still staring at the base of the waterfall. He had not looked at Marek. Now he looked and captured Marek's eyes with his. I'm convinced that the greatest immediate danger to the Empire may not be the rebel alliance. There's treachery in the air. Marek kept silent, not sure he wanted to hear this, but he could not look away. Despite himself, he was fascinated. Some high-ranking officers in the Imperial Navy, I'm afraid, may have some plans of their own. The information I have is only partial. I can't name any names yet, but soon I'll have the information I seek. Excuse me, sir, Marek interrupted, momentarily breaking the Admiral's spell. But why are you telling me this? Surely I can't be of any use to you. The Admiral turned slowly and studied Marek. You might be surprised, he said. Yes, you might be surprised. Marek was in his quarters, reading a performance analysis of his simulation training, and he realized that he had no idea what it said. He looked around. His head ached. He must have fallen asleep reading. Everything was familiar, nothing out of place, except one very small package on his holodesk. He picked it up and opened it slowly, still not fully connected to his senses. Morden's ring. Seeing the ring reminded him of the events of the past few days. News of Morden's death had hit the Vengeance like a hammer. Everybody was flattened, but none so completely as Marek. He had completed his simulation training and was awaiting final confirmation of his acceptance to active duty. He hadn't heard from Morden for several cycles and was beginning to wonder why. The official pronouncement followed on the heels of the shipboard rumors. Morden, it was announced, had died of natural causes and was succeeded by Admiral Karos. The Empire sent military investigators to the ship, and for several days they interviewed and interrogated crew members. They called it standard procedure, but when Marek's turn had come, as it inevitably did, he wondered at some of the questions they asked. Did the Admiral give you anything, any holo documents, any unusual objects? Marek had known better than to lie to these people. He took the small metal ring off his finger and handed it to one of the men. There were two of them, and they were both stern, serious, by-the-book types. While the two men examined the small ring, Marek tried to calm his breathing. From the moment he had entered the small room, he had felt a tightness in his chest and a sense of dread. The first man spoke. "We'll keep this for now, Cadet." "May I have it back, sir?" Marek had asked. The second man spoke then. They did this, alternating sometimes, as if they shared the same brain or something. "I don't know," answered the second man. The interrogation had lasted for several hours. They made Marek repeat everything Morden had told him. He spoke candidly, afraid to do otherwise. He could tell that the two men were disdainful of his relationship with the Admiral, perhaps even a bit suspicious. Finally, they required him to drink a caustic liquid. After that, he felt strange, observed himself talking, but not really getting the sense of what he said. And the next thing he knew, he was in his quarters reading, but not understanding, his performance analysis as if nothing had happened. It was several days later that the turmoil caused by Morden's death died down, the investigators shipped out, and routine once again set in. Marek was awaiting his first assignment as a pilot. He had little to do, and spent most of his time with other pilots or at the simulators. When the message came through, he almost missed it. He hadn't checked on the link for several days, didn't use it much. Mostly found general announcements or studied historical texts when he had nothing else to do. This message was different. It said, "Cadet Marek Stele, Imperial Star Destroyer Vengeance. Origin, Quantaroon. Stele, my dearest Marek, I have missed you. I hope you are well. Please write. I hope to meet you in Celadon City. All my love." The message was signed, Mother. Marek knew it was a phony from the first words. His mother, in her entire life, had never and would never call him my dearest Marek. Moreover, he had never planned to meet her in Celadon City. She would not have written all my love. Finally, she would not sign her name Mother. She would have signed it Marina. In fact, there was nothing right about this message at all. Intrigued and a little frightened, Marek looked at the message file itself. From the size of it, there should have been much more information. But he couldn't figure out how to examine the file. It was locked, and only the fake message would appear when he attempted to get inside. After several minutes of fruitless attempts, Marek gave up. He was about to head back to the simulators when it came to him. Celadon City. That wasn't something he and his mother shared. With a rush, he didn't know whether it was fear or excitement, he ran back to the holodeck. He located the message file and then keyed in the password. There's a fog over Celadon City. It had been his private code. This had to be from Morden. Stele, I am getting very close to the source of the treachery. Soon I will have the names of the traitors. But the enemies of the Empire also have their spies. I feel danger aboard the Vengeance. I am issuing orders to remove you from the ship. You will be sent to a remote outpost. There you may be safe. Eventually, you will be reassigned. If you get this message, it means something may have happened to me. Do your job. You will be contacted. You have exceptional gifts. Remember, don't take chances. Your friend, M. Marek read the message several times. He was struck by the irony of Morden's last line. No chances, indeed. When he had gleaned every nuance from the words on the screen, he punched the purge button, and the screen blanked out, leaving only the Imperial logo. It was risky to have any unrestricted message, and Marek knew it could be traced. But aboard the Star Destroyer, nobody really had the time to check every message. He thought for a long time about Morden. Anxious, he went to the simulators and flew some training missions. He always felt better when he was in the cockpit of a starfighter. The aftermath of Hoth. The rebel base at Hoth had been routed, a major victory for the Empire. Word of success had even reached out to this remote outpost, Platform D-34. When Morden had written in his message that he was removing Marek from danger, he hadn't been kidding. This place was dull, boring, and tedious. The platform itself guarded a major trade route in the Javin sector. Marek drew shifts every day, flying patrol and inspecting cargo craft that were detained by the Imperial customs agents. It had been exceedingly dull, but now there was a definite buzz in the air. He walked down the narrow hallway toward the launch pad, his boots making hollow thuds against the metal deck. He almost collided with one of the platform crew coming in from an adjoining hall. The man was a local, one of the kind who pulled long duty on the platform, staying there for a year or more. The man nodded in Marek's direction. Most of the locals were standoffish about pilots, who rarely stayed long, but this one was attempting to be friendly. Marek had no time to chat, though. The buzzer was sounding. There were incoming ships. As dull as it was inspecting cargo containers and freighters, it was better than sitting around on the platform. At least he'd be back in the cockpit. He was glad there was some action, however insignificant. TRN Sigma brought in the rebel fugitives, and Marek was at the launch pad when they were escorted in. There were 10 of them, shuffling along in shackles. An escort of blaster-carrying stormtroopers led them into the interior of the platform. Marek shrugged. It brought back memories of being a Bordali prisoner, but he figured it served the rebels right. He headed for the small area the pilots called home. It wasn't much, nothing like the suite of rooms dedicated to pilots aboard the Star Destroyer, but there he might find some other pilots to regale with his story. Meanwhile, elsewhere on PLT-34, the prisoners were escorted into a single cell in the brig. There they were removed one at a time and taken to the hastily rigged interrogation room. Major Thorbo, senior officer aboard the platform, was joined by Admiral Flanken, who commanded the Star Destroyer Hammer. "Your position is hopeless," Thorbo would begin. "You will never escape, and your petty rebellion will be crushed like the empty shell that it is." Inevitably, the prisoner would resist, giving only his name and rank within the rebellion as military code required. But that would never be the end of it. In the corner of the room was a strange-looking droid, which floated above the ground. There were various instruments protruding from its flexible arms. Flanken would speak then. "We truly mean you no harm, my friend. There is only the matter of your base location and current plans. We need only know a few facts, then you can return to join the others." Of course, they never joined the others, but that was a necessary lie. After a while, during which the same basic conversation would take place, Admiral Flanken would point to the droid in the corner of the room. "Do you know what that is, my friend?" He always called them "my friend." Some recognized the droid or knew its purpose. A shudder would pass through them, and Flanken would smile. The others, the ones who had never seen such a droid, would look defiantly, as if they did not care. That unlikely-looking droid is called an interrogation droid. It is quite adept at its job. It is impossible to resist, and can cause quite a bit of pain, I am told. It would be a shame to have to use it. This could all be quite pleasant. "Stop wasting time," Thorbo would interject. "Let's use the thing and get it over with. I rather look forward to seeing this defiant fool cut down to size." And so it would go. Some prisoners, particularly the Mugabe sympathizers, who were more mercenaries than true believers in the rebellion, would talk freely, giving what details they knew. Of course, they knew little, and inevitably the droid was used to wring out every gram of what they had inside. Others, the true rebels, were more resistant, but the result was the same. In the end, none could resist the droid, and the Imperial interrogators learned some useful information. Marek was getting bored again. He had been spending a lot of time in the simulators, which were of an older type than those aboard the Vengeance, and so were less realistic. There were a few other pilots aboard the platform, but none of them were in a very good mood. It wasn't a place where the up-and-coming pilots were stationed, and Marek, after a little time spent with the others, thought he knew why these particular pilots had been placed where they were. He was sure he belonged here, however, and itched to get a chance to prove his worth as he had aboard the Vengeance. His next opportunity came soon enough, when the rebels launched a sneak attack on the platform. But before that attack came, he was approached by a man in a robe reminiscent of the one the Emperor himself wore. The man approached quietly and stood for a second before saying, in a deep, quiet voice, "Stele." It was not a question, but a statement. Marek was instantly on edge. His battle reflexes took over, and he tensed his body against an expected attack. But the strange man only said, "We have been watching you. Have you not been advised to come see us?" "Yes," Marek answered carefully. In fact, Morden had insisted that he approach these strange people, but he had avoided doing so. Even in his boredom, he always found something else to do. "Yes, I was told to see you, but I don't see why." "Don't ask questions without reason," the man intoned. His voice was monotonous, but strangely compelling. Marek fell silent. "If you serve us, you serve the Emperor directly. Does that not please you?" Marek nodded. "Good. Then know that you have been chosen to be a member of a very secret society. I am one of the keepers of its principles. But there are many soldiers, and you will be one. Before you go into battle, always check with one of us, and we will provide you with additional tasks. Succeed in them, and you will earn a very rare and special reward." Marek listened. As audacious as these claims were, Marek knew them to be true, all of them. He was caught in a web of intrigue about which he knew nothing at all. But he knew he was caught, like a tauntaun from the recently vacated ice world of Hoth when the Wampa ice beast had it cornered. He knew there was no escape. "I will do as you ask, but am I to know nothing more?" From within the darkness of the hood, Marek glimpsed the suspicion of a smile. Or perhaps it was nothing more than a trick of light. Whatever it was instantly gone, and might never have been there at all. More will be revealed in time. If you serve us well, you will know all you need to know. The man turned to go, and Marek barely heard his last words. If you survive. Back on the Hammer, Flanken met with his advisors. He stood on the bridge, the bustle of Star Destroyer operations around him. He liked to discuss strategy amid all the activity going on. "I think we'll let the rebel attack proceed with minimal resistance, just in case it's a feint or they're testing the situation. We'll withhold the Hammer until they are fully committed. Then we'll hit them with all our power. It should be a short battle, don't you think?" Nobody disagreed. He was never so happy in his life as when he found out he was being transferred to the frigate. After weeks on the isolated outpost, Marek was relieved to be reassigned. He was shuttled up to the Fogger the day after the attack on the platform and given a bunk in the pilot's quarters toward the rear of the ship. The frigate was a strange-looking craft, something improbable at best. It hardly looked like a warship with its strangely stacked decks and long, thin body. Though nowhere near as large as a Star Destroyer, the frigate did have many people on board, including some fellow pilots. The first pilot Marek encountered was called Gromit. Marek eventually learned that he was a flight officer named Karith, but he had earned the name Gromit somewhere, and it remained his name to all. Gromit was a first-rate pilot, but a bit of a character outside the cockpit. When Marek first encountered him, he was standing outside the officers' mess and howling like a beast. A couple of other pilots were nearby. They ran for cover as the hatch leading into the mess slid open. Of course, Marek was caught by surprise, and when the officer looked out the door, he saw nobody else. "What's going on here?" the officer asked. Marek saluted and answered, "I just arrived, sir. I think there might have been an animal loose on the deck. I heard a noise." "Animal? Nonsense." The officer seemed to notice Marek for the first time. "Say, you're new, aren't you? What's your name, cadet?" "Stele, sir. Cadet Marek Stele." "Stele, is it? Well, Stele, I'll have no animals aboard my ship." The man stood a little straighter and stared into Marek's eyes. "And I'll be watching you." "Yes, sir," Marek answered, standing a little straighter himself. The officer retreated into the mess, and all of a sudden a cascade of giggles and guffaws exploded into the hallway. The man who had made the animal sounds ran up to Marek and took his hand. He spoke non-stop, as if he couldn't contain his enthusiasm. Marek liked him on sight. "Good man, hey, glad to meet you, Stele. Quick thinking that. I'm Karith, but everyone calls me Gromit. You the new pilot?" Marek nodded, but before he could speak, Gromit continued his onslaught. "This here's Alimet, and the tall one is Ketchel." He pointed to his companions. Alimet was about Marek's height, dark hair, almost black, and shaggy eyebrows. He looked as if he had just come in from a very dark place. His eyes were constantly blinking and shifting. Marek wondered what kind of pilot he could be. He was to find out later. Ketchel was tall for a pilot. He probably just made it under the maximum height requirements. He stood, shoulders forward and head craning as if he had a hard time hearing. His hair was reddish-brown, and his lips were thin. Marek glanced at Ketchel's hands, which were long, thin, and looked slightly deformed. He had half expected the pilots he met to look like clones of the ones he had met previously aboard the Vengeance, tall, straight, military, efficient. This motley lot, they were like characters from a holodrama. Meanwhile, Gromit had begun talking again. "It takes a while to get used to us," he said, obviously aware of Marek's reactions. "But the fact is, so many pilots come and go. Somehow, we just keep on going." "I'm up for a promotion soon." Gromit smiled and puffed out his chest comically. "You'll have to call me Flight Lieutenant Gromit." He laughed, and Marek found the laughter contagious. He realized suddenly how little of it he had heard in recent months. This might not be so bad after all. "Where's my manners?" Gromit suddenly exclaimed. "You'd probably like a tour, wouldn't you? Of course you would." Before Marek could answer, Gromit had turned down the hallway. "Come on, we'll show you around." Marek followed. Over the next few days, Marek spent a lot of time with Gromit and his friends. On the next mission, Gromit and Alimet were Marek's wingmen. There was no rest. They returned to the Fogger after the attack on the Mugari depot, but as soon as they came out of hyperspace, the klaxons began to ring, and every pilot was instantly mobilized. PLTD-34 was in enemy hands. There was a hasty briefing, and one of the robed men came up to Marek and gave him instructions. Then it was into the hangar and out into the laser-filled blackness. "I nearly got burned by that new craft," Alimet was saying. "You mean the escort shuckle?" Marek asked. He was biting down on some unrecognizable stew. The food aboard the frigate was probably a technological marvel, but it did little for the eye or the palate. "Yeah," continued Alimet, "I didn't realize it could fire to the rear." "I just hung back and fired some missiles," Marek offered, choking down his last lump of brown stuff. Gromit laughed. "Well, now we know. Missiles it is." "What if you run out of missiles?" asked one of the other pilots, a young, fair-complected man called Foucault. "Well," suggested Gromit in mock seriousness, "you could try a head-on attack." Foucault frowned, clearly a youngster with an arrested sense of humor. Meanwhile, on the bridge of the Fogger, Colonel Vistor was in conference with Admiral Flanken via ship-to-ship link. "We've traced their trail to the Bruani sector," Flanken was saying. "There's a Mugari depot there. I want you to send some ships over there and take care of business." "Right," answered the colonel. "Is it protected?" "Now how the hell am I supposed to know that?" answered Flanken. "Just send your gunboats. I'll be sending some as well. We'll commence the attack at 1500 hours. I'll send over the necessary navigation data for your hyperdrive computers. Any other questions?" "No, sir. We'll be ready," Vistor answered. As soon as the link was dissolved, he wiped his brow with a sleeve, caught himself, and stalked off to his private ready room. The bridge grew very still for a moment. Then all activity resumed. Mission briefing. We have located a Calamari light cruiser in the Bruani sector. It is believed that this cruiser was the launch point for the attacks on D-34. You will be a wingman in a flight of assault gunboats. Secret order. The rebels have too much Imperial war material. We suspect the complicity of some Imperial forces. You must inspect all rebel cargo containers to see if they contain any identifiable Imperial equipment. The man in the robe was talking. He seemed exceptionally pleased. "Yes, this is all the confirmation we have been wanting. We will be able to trace the person responsible for this treason. You have done well, Stele." Marek said nothing. He still was uncomfortable around the secret society. He waited for a dismissal. He didn't dare be rude to these men, but he knew that the mission to destroy the Lulsla was already starting, and he didn't want to miss the opportunity to be involved. But the man wasn't finished yet. He had still more orders for Marek. "You will destroy the Lulsla, and when you do, the rebels will scuttle out of their places where we can get them. Find their leaders for us. The Emperor will be pleased." Marek rushed off to battle, a small shiver running up his spine. He would not want to be in the rebels' place. Not now. Not ever. Meanwhile, Admiral Harkov flew to a secret rendezvous with rebel leader Mon Mothma. There, he offered to defect and to bring his part of the Imperial fleet with him, as long as the price was right. Sepan Civil War, his transfer was quite sudden and unexpected. He had been almost comfortable aboard the Fogger, and then the orders had come through. Marek was reassigned to a Victory-class Star Destroyer, the Protector. He was given no warning. One day, shortly after the battle with the Lulzler, he was told to pack up and report to the hangar. A transport was leaving in an hour, and he was to be on it. He said quick goodbyes to Gromit and the rest of them. Gromit was still expecting a promotion. Ketcher had his nose stuck in some historical hollow and hardly looked up, but Alimet made a big show of hugging Marek and kissing him on both cheeks, saying, "We will meet again, my friend. We are destined to meet again, of that I am sure." Then he was gone. The transport took him to the Star Destroyer, which, while smaller than the Imperial-class Star Destroyer Vengeance, was still a good deal more impressive than the frigate had been. He had very little time to orient himself. He had just located his bunk when the comlink lit up and he was called to a briefing. "In just 1 hour, we will jump into the Sepan sector to quell a long-standing civil war between the peoples of Republis and Dimok." Admiral Harkov stood at the podium. He was thin and looked as if he hadn't had enough sleep recently. He gestured with his hands, pointing randomly about the room. To Marek, he seemed somewhat erratic, but he was the Admiral after all, and everyone was listening intently. Marek wondered if the Admiral normally conducted briefings himself, as it was somewhat unusual for the commander of a Star Destroyer to do so. The Admiral's voice was strong and carried all the authority of his station. But to Marek's ear it was edgy and had an unpleasant twang about it. It might be an unfamiliar accent, Marek thought, but I don't much care for it. "We want to remind you," the Admiral continued, "that this is a peace mission. Our objective is to come to the aid of a small Republis convoy. This is not a mop-up mission. You must deliver a telling blow to the Dimok aggressors, but allow some to escape to tell their superiors of the might and will of the Empire. Are there any questions?" "How do we tell which of them to let escape?" asked one of the senior pilots. "Draw straws?" There was general laughter in the room, but the Admiral did not join in. "We want to remind you," the Admiral continued, "that this is a peace mission. Our objective is to come to the aid of a small Republis convoy. This is not a mop-up mission. You must deliver a telling blow to the Dimok aggressors, but allow some to escape to tell their superiors of the might and will of the Empire. Are there any questions?" "How do we tell which of them to let escape?" asked one of the senior pilots. "Draw straws?" There was general laughter in the room, but the Admiral did not join in. He glared at the speaker a moment, then said, "If there are no real questions, then you all have work to do." He was about to step off the podium when he stopped and said, "Captain Trace, I want a word with you." The pilot who had made the joke stood up and walked slowly toward the Admiral. Marek was on his way out of the briefing room, but just as he left, he observed the Admiral raise his hand and slap the captain hard across the face. There were some angry words that Marek could not quite make out. Then he was out the hatch and could see no more. On schedule, an hour later, the Protector jumped to Sepan, and immediately the Imperial forces mobilized to catch the Dimoks in the act. Marek wasn't sure what it was. Certainly there was something bothering him aboard the Protector, something gnawing at him. It took him a day or two to identify it. Morale. The crew and other pilots he met here were not happy. The ship was run very strictly, and security was tighter than he had ever seen. Right after the mission to drive off the Dimoks, Marek was ordered to report to one of the briefing rooms. On his way there, he happened to get lost, and came to a door that led to another part of the ship. 2 Navy troopers stood at the door with blaster rifles held ready across their chests. They came to attention as Marek approached. "This area's restricted, no admittance without a proper pass." "Sorry," said Marek, "I was looking for briefing room 14F on deck 20. The first guard looked suspiciously at Marek, while, out of the corner of his eye, Marek noticed that the other guard shifted his rifle ever so slightly. "This is Deck 19, he said gruffly. He took out a small recording device. "State your name and rank," he ordered. Puzzled, Marek complied. The guard seemed satisfied then. He put the recorder away and ordered Marek to go about his business. He found his way to briefing room 14F without further incident, but he felt somber and suddenly tired. Perhaps that's why he said what he did. Here's how it happened. He sat down in a seat in the briefing room. It was empty. He waited perhaps 10 minutes. Then an officer appeared. It was Captain Trace, the one whom Harkov had slapped. The captain walked quickly into the room and pressed a button near the podium. A small table began rising from the floor. The table had 2 modular chairs attached to it, and the whole apparatus slowly appeared with a high whining sound and a loud click when it had completely emerged. Then Trace motioned for Marek to come sit, saying, "You're Stele, I believe. Welcome to the VSD Protector." Marek walked slowly to the strange little table and sat in one of the seats. The captain sat in the other chair, so they faced one another. "Yes, I'm Stele, sir. Is there something wrong?" He'd only been on the ship for a day, and already he was being called in to a special meeting. That most often meant a reprimand, or something worse. But Trace smiled. It wasn't a big smile, just a breath of humour on his otherwise stern visage. "Nothing wrong, no, nothing wrong." He said it as if he were trying to convince himself, or at least that was Marek's impression. But the captain wasn't finished. "No, I'm just here to indoctrinate you to life aboard the Protector." He sounded quite bored. "Yes, sir," Marek answered. "I'd appreciate that." "Would you?" Trace looked a little surprised. "Well, it does seem a little different here," Marek answered. "I've watched your performance in the mission we just completed," the captain said, scratching behind his ear. Then he rubbed his temples with thumb and middle finger, bending his head slightly forward to do so. "You're an able pilot, Stefel. You know your way around the cockpit, I'll give you that. But you also went beyond your orders. Why did you do that?" Instantly Marek was wary. What did he say? Did he admit to performing extra tasks for the men in robes? He prevaricated. "I thought it would be helpful, sir. I hope I did nothing wrong." The captain interrupted him. "Around here, Stefel, things are done by the book. We don't do more or less than we're asked. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir. I will attempt to do my duty, sir." "Good. You are to stay within your assigned area of the ship. No wandering, exploring, getting lost." He emphasized this last condition, so he had already been informed of Marek's encounter with the guard. "Or asking unnecessary questions. Are we clear?" Now this is where Marek's being tired made him say what he would certainly have held in under normal circumstances. "Is that why you asked that strange question at the briefing?" he asked before he knew he'd said it. Trace's first reaction was to stiffen. Clearly he was about to rebuke Marek, but suddenly he laughed and slapped the table quite hard. Marek tried to push away from the table, but his chair was attached. "You're an insolent little pup," Trace said when he had caught his breath. "Under control again," he added, "or a damned fool. I'll be watching to see which. Better watch what you say around here, though, Stele. Humor isn't encouraged. You're dismissed." "Thank you, sir," Marek said, already getting out of his chair. He was halfway across the room when the captain said in a modulated voice, "A word of advice. Don't let the Admiral notice you. You'll be better off that way." At the time, Marek had no way of knowing how prophetic a statement that was. "Just what did you think you were doing out there?" The captain was clearly angry. He was pacing back and forth, looming over Marek, who was sitting at the strange little table in the briefing room again. "Didn't I tell you to follow orders and do what you're told?" Marek said nothing. He held his hands, palms together, making a little tent of his fingers, and pointed them subtly in the captain's direction. It was an old gesture from Quan, his home planet. It was used to ward off conflict. Captain Trace visibly calmed himself and continued in a more reasonable tone. "I suppose congratulations are in order. You did help us identify and capture something or someone important. I don't know what it is, but Senior Command seemed happy enough." Marek shifted in his seat, but said nothing. "A word of advice, Stele. Don't be a hero. Just do your job and keep out of trouble." The captain leaned on the table and looked Marek in the eyes. "I don't know if I'm supposed to punish you or congratulate you." Marek smiled at that. "Sir, I know my actions seem undisciplined. I guess I'm just inquisitive by nature." Trace mulled over this statement for a moment. "I think there's a proverb about curiosity killing some creature. On Quan, we say, curiosity killed the Rondat," Marek offered. "Don't be a Rondat, then," the captain said finally. "Okay, get out of here." "You're dismissed." And satisfaction brought him back, thought Marek as he left the room. Harkov sat behind a large desk. The visitor stood. Angrily, Harkov held up a small hollow disk, saying, "This is unacceptable. Go tell your masters that it's pay in advance. Tell them also that they had better keep their mouths shut tight. I think someone's getting suspicious." The other man nodded and took the hollow disk from the Admiral's outstretched hand. "You must understand, Admiral, that we are at war with Republis. We must have those arms." Harkov interrupted. "And you will have them, but not before I receive payment in full." The Admiral got slowly out of his seat and leaned forward on his desk. "I'm sure the leaders of Republis would be happy to pay in advance for Imperial weapons." "From what we've seen, they already have a supplier," the other man answered bitterly. "You Imperials think you can do whatever you want. You may be surprised at what happens," the man added. Harkov's eyes narrowed slightly, but otherwise he betrayed no reaction to the man's statement. "Just see that I get what's due, and don't waste your breath threatening me," he added casually, as if it were a mere annoyance. "There's nothing you or your government can do. Now get out of here." Elsewhere, Marek was awakened by a muted hiss, the sound of his doorway opening. It was dark. Only the soft glow of the comlink ready light cast any illumination in the small cabin. Marek could sense the presence of another in the room, though he heard and saw nothing. "Stele." The voice was low and insistent. What is it? Who are you?" He scanned the room, his eyes as wide as they could go, trying to make out who was there. "The Emperor needs your assistance," the voice said again. The tone was sepulchral. Marek felt his scalp tighten. Something wasn't right. "I don't know who you are," he said. He reached for the light. "Do not turn on the light," the voice insisted, but Marek ignored it. He punched the button by his bunk, and the room became bright. They both blinked a moment as their eyes became accustomed to the sudden illumination. When he could speak again, Marek said, "Captain Trace." The captain looked chagrined. "I must have made a mistake." "What in the world did you think you were doing?" Marek asked. He was shaking, not sure whether he wanted to throttle the man or laugh out loud. The captain shook his head. "I was sure you were working for the Secret Order. I saw you speaking to one of them before." Marek studied the man. He had suspected from the beginning that there was something unusual about him. "Why does that interest you, Captain?" Marek asked. Trace scrutinized the bleary-eyed Marek closely for a moment, clearly considering speaking. Then he shook his head, obviously thinking better of saying anything more. "This meeting never happened," he said. Marek nodded. "Whatever you say, Captain," he replied. After Captain Trace had gone, Marek lay awake for hours, thinking about the captain, the order, Harkov, Morden. And when he slept, his dreams were confused and full of strange images. Through it all, the Emperor loomed, his voice filling Marek. Not for the first time, nor the last. You are mine. Mission 4. Capture enemies. Mission briefing. Imperial intelligence has discovered that the leaders of Republius and Dimok are planning a deep space rendezvous near Sepan 8. You will fly as a wingman in a 4-ship flight of assault gunboats. Secret order. Look for any large cargo vessels. We need to know what is inside them. Someone is selling arms to both Republius and Dimok. The Emperor wants to know who it is. Can you imagine using their own children as hostages? These people are savages. The Admiral was clearly furious. The man on the other end of the priority comlink channel sounded unimpressed. I'm more concerned with these discrepancies in the supply manifests, Admiral Harkov. As you well know, I've been assigned to investigate possible misappropriations. Surely, even a man in your somewhat dull position can appreciate that there are bigger and more significant events in the galaxy than a few lost parts, Harkov said, his voice condescending. But the man on the other end of the link continued in the same matter-of-fact voice. I'm more concerned with these discrepancies in the supply manifests, Admiral Harkov. As you well know, I've been assigned to investigate possible misappropriations. Surely, even a man in your somewhat dull position can appreciate that there are bigger and more significant events in the galaxy than a few lost parts, Harkov said, his voice condescending. But the man on the other end of the link continued in the same matter-of-fact voice. We're not talking about a few parts, Admiral. We're talking about weapons. Yes, I know, said the Admiral, sounding impatient. I'm far too busy to deal with this. Take it up with my quartermaster in supply section. I already have, the man began, but Harkov cut the link. Marek did not see Captain Trace anywhere that next day. He was in the mess with a few other pilots, having a bland meal. He had been up early on a routine inspection shift, and he was tired. He was listening with only half his attention, still puzzled by the events of the night before. He heard someone say, "Dot, new type of starfighter, that's what I heard." He looked around. It was a pilot called Shreet. Marek didn't know him well. In fact, he hadn't had time to get to know anyone very well yet. But Shreet had a reputation as a gossip and rumour-monger. Marek was tempted to ignore the man, but something in his tone made him listen. That's right, it's supposed to be a faster starfighter, like a TIE fighter, but with shields and hyperspace and rocket launchers. Oh, come on, Shreet, that's ridiculous, one of the other pilots said. Shreet looked defensive at being challenged. Well, it's something like that, he said. Well, they'll never let you fly one anyway, one of the pilots chided, and Shreet glared at him. This launched the group into a heated discussion about who was the best pilot and who had saved whom during various battles. Marek quickly lost interest in the banter and got up to return to his cabin. He was about halfway there when one of the Order's robed figures detached himself from a small alcove and walked up to him. "The Emperor needs you," he began. Marek stopped still and tried to peer under the man's hood. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" The man stood silent a moment. Then he continued, as if Marek had not said a thing. "You will soon be on a mission to protect a valuable shipment. Be alert. We require you to investigate any unknown shuttles. We suspect that there is more to this civil war than we had suspected. Someone is supplying Imperial weapons to both sides, and the Emperor wants to find out who is behind it." By this time, Marek was sure this man was genuine. "I will do my best," he said. The man in the robe turned and left. Marek continued to his cabin, wondering the whole time why he couldn't just be a pilot, fly starfighters, and stay out of other people's business. Mission 5, Guard Resupply Mission Briefing. The Protector is receiving a shipment of new starfighters. These TIE Advanced, the so-called Avengers, will help to replace ships lost in recent operations and will provide even more advantages to our pilots against the enemies of the Empire. You will protect the escort carrier Trepsabor during docking operations. When the battle was over, one of the robed men approached Marek as he headed back to his quarters. "You have done well, Stele," the man said. "Due to your efforts on the part of the Empire, a member of the Rebel Alliance was discovered aboard the Shu Umlaut. This is significant." "May I ask how so?" Marek asked. "You have earned the right to know. Your loyalty has been noted, and you will be invited to receive a special award tonight." Marek felt his stomach turn over. What kind of award did the order present? But the man was still speaking. "In answer to your question, we have noticed that the rebel was taken immediately to Harkov's private ready room. He has been alone with the prisoner since then." "I don't understand. Perhaps he's interrogating the prisoner," Marek suggested. "This is not standard interrogation procedure," answered the man simply. Then he added, "In addition, Harkov's ship has continually been plagued with supply shortages. The evidence leads us to believe that Harkov has been falsifying reports to cover his black market schemes, selling weapons to both sides of the Sapan civil war. And the presence of a rebel leader aboard the shuttle indicates that he is making some arrangements with the Alliance as well." Marek hadn't really cared much for Harkov from the beginning, but he was shocked to hear such an accusation made against a senior admiral in the Imperial fleet. Speechless, he simply stared into the darkness of the man's hood, where the light occasionally reflected off the man's eyes. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught a glimpse of movement behind a nearby bulkhead. He just got a quick look, but he recognized the light hair and captain's uniform. "Trace!" "There's something I must tell you," he began, but the robed man held up his hand. "Your captain has been very inquisitive. Do not worry, we will take care of him." "I don't think he means any harm," Marek said quickly. "I have a feeling about him." "Yes," was the answer. "We will deal with him." And that was the last time Marek saw Trace aboard the Protector. Later that day, Admiral Harkov addressed the leaders of the Sepan system. He declared their war over and assured them that the Empire would not tolerate any breach of the peace. He promised that peace would bring prosperity and suggested that cooperation could bring full privileges to the worlds of Sepan. There were several among those listening whose expressions betrayed a good deal of disdain, even hatred, and although the word hypocrisy never passed anybody's lips, it was foremost in their thoughts. But nobody interrupted. At another location, far away, a very private meeting took place between a member of the Emperor's Order and another robed man, this one dressed in black, masked, and of formidable stature and bearing. His breathing was audible, as if assisted by some apparatus hidden beneath his robes. Lord Darth Vader, the Emperor's chief vassal, listened to the Order's suspicions about Harkov. He stood straight and still, and stared steadily ahead through the eye-holes of his strange mask. When he spoke, his voice was deep and eerily resonant. "Get me the evidence," Vader told the man. "Then we will deal with Admiral Harkov." Battle on the frontier. The Pakuni system is a hotbed of pirate activity. The Emperor's envoy was droning on. Thrawn thought him boring, but listened politely, his mind wandering to a particularly interesting sculpture he had recently received, reputedly from the old world of Burchest. His strange red eyes narrowed as the man before him spoke. Occasionally he would nod or grunt some reply to these assertions, but finally Thrawn could take no more of the man's incessant posturing. "Thank you for your generous assessment of the Pakuni situation," he said. Please inform the Emperor that I will take the necessary steps to bring order to that area and make the trade lanes safe from illegal activities." The envoy, to his credit, could tell when he was being dismissed. He gave a salute, turned, and walked off, but not before Thrawn noticed that familiar disdain which pure humans often worked so hard to hide from him. He had worked harder than any officer, proving himself again and again, until now he commanded a Star Destroyer. But even now his non-human status forced him to take on operations beneath his abilities. Someday. This mission to Pakuni was an insignificant task, but the Emperor still required more proof of Vice Admiral Thrawn's abilities and loyalty. He would coordinate the cleanup of the area first, then build a lasting Imperial presence which would ensure that the pirates would stay away. Those who survived. The Vice Admiral placed his hand on the comlink button, his blue lips drawing back into a satisfied but feral-looking smile. He would even have time to work with his art collection during this operation. Marek was transferred again, this time to the FRG Ludwig. The reason for the transfer was a total mystery, but he suspected it had something to do with the Secret Order wanting to get him away from Kharkov. Aboard the Ludwig, he received a pleasant surprise. He had just settled into his new cabin. He was getting quite proficient now at finding his way through new starships and getting settled. He knew the layout of a frigate pretty well, and was headed for the pilot's lounge. He heard a familiar sound echoing through the hallway, and he increased his pace. It was the sound of a wild animal, and he had heard it only once before, again aboard a frigate. "Gromit," he called, "you maladjusted sack of gravel worms! Are you making trouble again?" Sure enough, just ahead was his friend, flanked by the inevitable duo of Alimet and Ketcher. Gromit was looking up in surprise, his body leaning one way and his face the other, clearly. Caught in the act? Then he smiled broadly, put his finger to his lips, and motioned for Marek to follow. This time, Marek managed to get down the hallway and out of sight before the commanding officer, a Commander Buckeye, came out to investigate. They ran back to the pilot's lounge and there sat laughing and breathing hard for a minute before Marek asked, "What in 1,000 worlds is that sound anyway, Gromit?" "Oh, it's just the sound of the Sand People from an obscure planet called Tatooine. I was once stationed there and happened to get lost out on the desert. I heard that sound once and it nearly paralyzed me. I only caught a glimpse of the creatures who made it. My land speeder was heading back to base before I realized I was in it. I tell you, it was an experience." Marek frowned. "That still doesn't explain why you keep howling in the hallways of various frigates." Gromit smiled. "You ask a lot of questions, Marek. How about we show you the sights?" "Fine. Hey, do you know what kind of operations this ship is performing? I've just come back from an interplanetary war. It was a real mess." Alimet spoke up. "I think we're going to go up against some pirates," he said brightly. "Pirates, huh?" The thought of pirates thrilled him, just as it did with almost every other kid in the galaxy. After all, who hadn't once dreamt of a life as a ruthless space pirate with all the riches, women, and adventure a man could want? But those were childhood dreams. Putting aside the visions, Marek got back to reality in a hurry. "That should be interesting. Do you think they know what they're doing in a cockpit?" Even Ketcher looked up at this question, but it was Gromit who answered. "That's the thing about pirates. You never know. But I figure they won't have the latest equipment. We'll take care of them." Everyone agreed it was going to be an interesting operation. But first, they were sent to Argoon to help in the investigation of a recently abandoned manufacturing plant. There wasn't much to do aboard the Ludwig. For the first few days, Marek and his friends took turns telling battle stories. They had all survived a lot of close calls, and Alimet had even lost a ship. He recounted his rescue as if it were one of the greatest miracles of all time, and everyone agreed that he had been awfully lucky. Gromit had received his promotion at last. He was now a lieutenant, but the new rank seemed to have done nothing to settle him down. A few days after the mission at Argoon, Gromit suggested they go down the hangar and see if they could take any ships out. "We'll say we're on training maneuvers," he said with a grin. Of course, Marek and the others told him it wouldn't work, but he had it in his head that they needed something to do, and flying simulators wasn't enough. They headed quickly to the hangar, which was close by. As the doorway to the main hangar opened, they could just see an Imperial shuttle settling down onto the landing pad. There were special guards at the entrance, blocking the way. "State your business," demanded one of the guards. "What do you think?" answered Gromit, adopting a tone of studied nonchalance. "We're pilots. This is the hangar. We're on maneuvers." The guard seemed somewhat satisfied with the answer, but he asked, "Do you have orders to be here?" "Of course," answered Gromit. "From Commander Buckeye." He lied. The guard eyed Gromit suspiciously. "It was the commander himself who told us to detain anybody coming onto the hangar. There's an important visitor." But Gromit was too far committed to back down now. "Obviously, the commander did not mean us. Now let us through so we can go on about our business." During this whole exchange, Marek kept wanting to interrupt, but couldn't think of anything to say. He was ready to run or to gag Gromit, something, anything to avoid watching this idiotic stunt reach its inevitable and tragic conclusion. So, when the guard said, "All right, you may pass," he almost fell over. It had worked. Now, if the commander never found out... They entered the hangar and quickly walked over to a row of TIE bombers. The original plan had been to take some starfighters out for fun, but now the intrigue of the arriving shuttle had snared them. They hid behind the TIE bombers and watched as a strange-looking being walked down the ramp from the shuttle, flanked by stormtroopers. The visitor was clearly not human, but he was in the uniform of a vice admiral of the Imperial Navy. In his short time serving the Empire, Marek had learned how rare it was to find any aliens in the Navy, let alone at such a high rank. The man's skin was blue, and his eyes appeared to be quite red. His hair was blue-black and looked thick and stiff. His uniform was impeccably neat, without a crease showing, and Marek found himself wondering if this strange creature had stood the whole time he was inside the shuttle. Standing near the newly arrived craft was Commander Buckeye. The two saluted and stood talking for a few moments. Marek, whose hearing was quite exceptional for a human, could make out most of what they were discussing. "A commander who does a very good job could do very well," said the blue-skinned alien. "Yes, Admiral Thrawn," agreed Buckeye. "There are always opportunities. You will be heading for Pakuni to help set up an Imperial presence there. Do you understand your task?" The Admiral's voice was deep, underscored with the inevitable ring of authority. Marek had rarely heard anything like it. Something about Thrawn reminded him of Morden, though there was no obvious connection between the two. Buckeye was recounting the tactical plan to the Admiral, who was beginning to look impatiently around the hangar. For just an instant, his eyes brushed by the place where Marek and his friends were hiding. A rush of fear enveloped Marek in the instant those red eyes seemed to focus their intensity on him. But if Thrawn had seen them, he made no indication. He simply listened until Commander Buckeye was finished, then said, "Good. See that your troops do the job. There will be no failure in this operation. It is good to see you again, Commander. I want you to begin immediately. I will hold the stalwart ready when you have need of her." Then the Admiral turned, and, followed by his stormtroopers, he headed up the ramp and back into the Imperial shuttle. Commander Buckeye stepped back and gave an order. Then he left the hangar as the shuttle rose on its repulsor lifts and floated toward the hangar bay, and from there out into the vacuum. "Looks like we're on the move again," said Gromit. "Right," said Alamet. "I guess we should get ready for a jump." Marek looked around at the various starfighters around the hangar. Suddenly everything looked different. There was something about Thrawn, an aura of power that Marek still felt in his bones. He followed his friends in a daze. Everything seemed new. Even the colors aboard the frigate were more vibrant. Something inside him had changed, though he couldn't imagine what it was. "When are you ever going to learn to keep your mouth closed?" asked Alamet grumpily, as he dragged the remains of a sentry droid into the growing pile of metal and slag on the hover platform. Gromit was pulling apart a blasted-out control panel with Marek on the other end. "It's a small price to pay, I'd say," he answered calmly, grunting as he pulled. "All the same," Marek offered, "I think we got off easy. It could have been a lot worse." They were down on the pirates' base, helping tear it apart in preparation for the arrival of the new Imperial base equipment. As it turned out, the guards had informed Commander Buckeye about the matter of 4 pilots who had sneaked into the hangar during his meeting with Thrawn, but the commander had been too busy to deal with them until after the first Pakuni mission was over. He had little trouble identifying which pilots were involved, however, and punished them by putting them on this cleanup duty. A real slap in the face. Ordinarily, Imperial pilots would not be required to perform such menial duties, especially if they did not involve flight operations or the maintenance of their own areas of the home base. But Marek was right about one thing. The punishment could have been worse. Much worse. Fortunately, Commander Buckeye was a good leader, and he realized that these transgressors were 4 of his best pilots. In the mission at Argoon, they had all performed well, and against the pirates they had been very effective, even helping to discover some hidden rebels among the cargo containers. In reality, this wasn't at all a punishment. Oh, they had to work hard, but it got them off the frigate, and for pilots on extended duty aboard Imperial ships, the most difficult times were those between missions when there was almost nothing to do. As the 4 friends poked around amid the destruction of the pirate base, they were able to escape the inevitable post-mission boredom. Not that there was anything of any value left. Either taken by fleeing pirates, appropriated by the initial inspection crews, or blasted to slag, all that remained of the base were fragments of the odd droid or small transport, plus various remnants of storage areas and control rooms. That's why it was so remarkable when Ketcher, who had been working off by himself nearby, came running over, ducking under the twisted wreckage of a hatchway, to show them what he had discovered. "What is it?" asked Gromit, reaching for the small, shiny crystal in Ketcher's large hand. But Ketcher drew his hand back. "I don't know," he said, "but I'm keeping it." "You'll get in trouble, you know," said Alamet. "They told us to hand over anything unusual. That looks like something valuable." "Right," said Ketcher, "and I'm keeping it." Then, before anyone could stop him, he put the small crystal in his mouth and swallowed it. Marek had a bad feeling about this development. "You sure you want to do that?" he asked, too late. Ketcher normally said little. "Guess it don't matter now," was his reply. They fell silent, each lost in his own private world of thought, and returned to their labors. The discovery of a mysterious, unknown crystal represented something different to each of them. For Marek, at any rate, this glowing gemstone represented something dangerous, with a power of its own, though he supposed to the others it simply represented something of immense value, or perhaps an object of surpassing beauty. And then there was the thrill of keeping something back, a small moment of personal triumph over the system, but they weren't supposed to be thinking that way, were they? Soon after they were called back to the ship, the convoy was about to arrive. The construction of the new space station proceeded quickly, and Marek spent much of his free time watching the heavy lifters and tugs move equipment. It was like a complex dance conducted on a very large scale. The lifters would hover over the large containers and drag out huge sections of a wall or a crate of equipment larger than a starfighter. In the weightlessness of space, these large loads floated effortlessly. Occasionally there was some excitement. A tug with a particularly wide load might come too close to a lifter, and their loads would bump. It all seemed comical, but Marek could see that these collisions caused great damage to the cargo. Even in space, everything had mass, and when one item hit another, and both massed several tons, the results were generally destructive. Periodically, Marek and the other pilots would fly combat space patrol, watching over the construction. At these times, he might have enjoyed an even better view of the construction activity, but he had to remain alert for the sudden appearance of an enemy, not to mention the possibility of a sudden collision of his own. With their hyperspace-capable starfighters, the rebels could show up anywhere, at any time, and so it was that Marek found himself in the middle of another battle. "I'm sorry, Vice Admiral Thrawn, our TIE fighters and TIE interceptors are all being repaired and refurbished just now. Can you not delay your inspection?" The speaker, a small adjutant to the Ludwig, was practically begging. But Thrawn was impatient. It was time to oversee this new station, to be sure it would serve the Empire. Some people could trust the opinions of others, but Thrawn was not one of them. "I will inspect the station today. Please inform Commander Buckeye that I will be arriving in 3 hours." Back on the Ludwig, the commander was conducting a briefing regarding Thrawn's visit. "We only have TIE bombers to act as a defensive shield. Security is very tight, but in the event of a sneak attack, we will not have the luxury of speed on our side. The defense of the Admiral will depend almost exclusively on TIE bombers. We will have an ample supply of missiles, however, and you will have an opportunity to reload. This is critical. There will be no failure." The commander referred to a holo display readout. "We have also equipped some TIE bombers with special advanced concussion missiles. These missiles are stronger, faster, and more accurate than conventional models. See that you use them wisely." On the way from the briefing to the hangar, Gromit was going on about the new advanced missiles. "I can't wait to send one of these missiles up the throat of some rebel X-Wing. I'll bet they make one dandy fireball." Marek laughed. "Let's just hope they don't have anything like 'em to shoot back at us," he said. "Don't be warped," Gromit told him. "Can't you let a guy have some fun?" "Sure," answered Marek. "I just don't like the idea of rebels with missiles." "Who does?" Gromit asked. "Rebels, I suppose," interjected Alamet. That made them laugh. "Hey, Ketcher," Gromit suddenly asked, "whatever happened to that crystal?" Ketcher stopped, smiled, and opened his tunic. Underneath it was the red crystal, glowing against his white chest. It was hung on a small wire. Quickly, Ketcher closed his shirt, once again hiding the crystal. "So," began Gromit. He looked thoughtful for a moment. He seemed about to speak, but then shook his head. "Looks good," was all he said. Then he turned to continue down the passage leading to the hangar. Before reaching the hangar, Marek left his friends, seeking out the Secret Order representative. He received his usual instructions, then he hurried to catch up with the other pilots and launch the mission. Mission 5. Thrawn inspects NL-1. Vice Admiral Thrawn has decided to inspect the new facility at NL-1. He will take a transport from the Stalwart to the station, inspect it, and return. You will fly with one wingman in a TIE bomber equipped with 16 advanced concussion missiles. Resupply will be available should you need it. You must protect the Vice Admiral at all costs. Remember, you will be responsible for his safety during the entire time he is away from the Stalwart. After Thrawn had approved the construction effort, activities aboard the Ludwig slowed down. Now it was time to wait for relief forces, and there was little to do. One day, the big excitement was the delivery of the new SPCs, Special High-Speed System Patrol Craft, designed to watch for enemy incursions and other significant events. They were ungainly-looking craft, fat and seemingly festooned at random with antennae and other less familiar devices. Marek watched as the SPCs flew out on their first mission. At 150 meters, they were quite noticeable and hardly seemed designed for high-speed maneuvering. Marek knew they carried a standard crew of 4, with room for nearly 100 stormtroopers. If needed, they could be used as an emergency troop transport. They were well shielded and might even be useful in assault-type situations. Gromit and Alimet joined Marek at the observation deck between shifts to watch the activity around the station. Ketcher seemed to keep more and more to himself. The VSD stalwart stayed nearby during these final phases of the outpost's construction, and there was little danger. Soon, however, word came down that the stalwart was going to leave to escort the relief forces. During that time, the outpost would be far more vulnerable, and the pilots began taking more frequent shifts in the cockpit. They had seen little of Ketcher in the days past, and Marek suggested looking in on him. He hadn't been on the active duty list during the last mission, and so hadn't flown. When they found Ketcher in his quarters, he looked sleepy. Not that he was the energetic type normally, but he appeared listless and barely acknowledged their presence. "Hey, Ketcher, you all right?" asked Gromit cheerfully. The tall man looked directly at them, but it was as if he didn't see them. "I'm fine," he said in a distant voice. "What are you doing here?" Alimet spoke up. "We just came to see if you'd like to play some sabak, or maybe come have a drink." Ketcher seemed to brighten at the thought of sabak. He was a nasty player whose bluffs were impenetrable. "Maybe later," he said after a moment. "I'm feeling a little tired," he added. "Think I'll rest a while." "What do you suppose is wrong with him?" asked Alimet. For once, Gromit had no answers. Marek suggested, "Maybe he has some kind of virus or something." They both looked at him blankly. "Well," said Marek defensively, "something's sure the matter with him." Conflict at Mylock IV. As it turned out, Marek received transfer orders again. This time he was moved to the FRG Seamus, under the command of Admiral Zarin. He didn't have a chance to say goodbye to Ketcher, though he did take his leave once again of Gromit and Alimet. "Take care of Ketcher," he had said as he left, and they assured him they would. He was about to leave when Alimet asked, "How come you're always being transferred, Marek? You move around more than any of us." "Don't know," answered Marek, but privately he suspected he did know. It was almost certainly the Order that was behind his frequent moves. Starting with Morden, Marek knew he had been a pawn in a larger game. They moved him at their whim, so he could do the work they could not do. How many others were there like him, basically doing the Emperor's little jobs, but not knowing a thing about why they were necessary, or what the information they uncovered might mean? In the end, what he thought didn't matter. He was, for some inexplicable reason, what he was, a tool. And wasn't that what he signed up for when he joined the Imperial Navy? He supposed he should feel especially privileged to perform these extra tasks, never mind how many times the process involved had nearly gotten him killed. Marek thought about the Order, the Emperor, Harkov, Trace, and a lot of other subjects on the transport that took him to his new assignment, the FRG Seamus. As usual, he slid silently and easily into the framework of yet another ship, and within hours he was ready for active duty once again. He recognized a few of the pilots aboard the Seamus. None were friends, but they were familiar enough, and they also recognized him. There was no mistaking the buzz of sudden conversation which began when he entered the mess. Nobody greeted him, and he collected some food, not bad by frigate standards, and went to sit at an empty table. He wasn't feeling sociable anyway. Yes, Marek had begun to gain a reputation, among the other pilots at least. He suspected that his strange behavior on missions, those actions that often got him in trouble with his superiors, also bothered the other pilots. Add to that the fact that he was rarely punished for his apparent lack of discipline, and he must have seemed doubly strange. He suspected that the Order somehow prevented him from taking the heat when he broke formation or went off seemingly on a mission of his own design. Of course, he had frequently turned up important information or ID'd the odd rebel-carrying ship. That was a part of his reputation as well. His promotions had come faster than most, he had to accept that. But more and more, when his friends were not around, the other pilots had begun to leave him alone. He was more than a little surprised then when Zeal first approached him. "You're Stele, aren't you?" the pilot had asked. "Yes," Marek had answered, automatically studying the man who stood before him. He was quite young, his face unseamed by the rigors of space combat. You could see it in the eyes. After a dozen missions or so, a pilot gained a certain look in the eyes. Other pilots could see it. Of course, thousands of new pilots never got that look. They didn't live long enough. Despite his youth and apparent lack of experience, the young man seemed quite self-possessed. He had an air about him, something Marek, mulling over in his mind later, identified as quiet arrogance. The young pilot endured Marek's quick appraisal, then asked, "May I sit down?" "Certainly," Marek answered, motioning toward a chair. "What's your name, cadet?" he asked. Without taking his eyes off Marek, he sat and told him, "I'm Zeal." "It's good to meet you, Zeal," answered Marek. "What can I do for you?" "I want you to teach me how to survive." The eyes never wavered. The young man was completely serious. To Marek's credit, he resisted the temptation to laugh, his initial impulse. He had never been asked to teach anyone. It seemed absurd. But then, looking at this earnest young pilot, he realized that the man's life expectancy was depressingly low. Most pilots died in their first real combat. The odds were never very good, but they got better the longer you survived. Veteran pilots, which Marek had to admit he was now, developed an instinct for survival in the heat of battle. Some of it was knowing how to control your starfighter and how to gain an advantage or watch your back. Some of it was simply the knowledge of when to fight and when to back off. For instance, most pilots had to learn not to try a head-on pass against an enemy starfighter in an unshielded craft. Those that tried it often didn't live to learn the lesson. Moreover, Marek knew that his own survival odds had increased dramatically under the tutelage of Admiral Morden, whose experiences had helped fill in the gaps in Marek's own training. For instance, most pilots had to learn not to try a head-on pass against an enemy starfighter in an unshielded craft. Those that tried it often didn't live to learn the lesson. Moreover, Marek knew that his own survival odds had increased dramatically under the tutelage of Admiral Morden, whose experiences had helped fill in the gaps in Marek's own training. Perhaps this hopeful young man's request was less absurd than he had at first thought. But then, he, Marek, was hardly a Morden. Zeal sat patiently, watching Marek consider his request. When Marek finally responded, "I'll be happy to tell you what I know, but it's precious little," a broad smile lit up Zeal's face, and he beamed. "Thank you. You have no idea how happy that makes me," he said. Just then, Marek saw through the quiet confidence Zeal exuded and realized that this young man was scared to death. Admiral Zarin was checking the convoy schedule. "You're sure you've double-checked the security?" he asked. Major Krunder nodded. "Everything has been checked and rechecked, sir. You know, Krunder, this technology is going to be a big asset for the Empire. The Emperor will surely reward those who bring it to him." The Major nodded again, knowingly. "Yes, sir, I understand. But what will we do about the Nharwak? They are balking." Zarin picked up a small ceremonial knife from his desk and held it before his face, staring at its sharp tip. Krunder stiffened noticeably. "We will deal with the Nharwak, Krunder, just as we will deal with all our enemies." The Admiral put the knife down slowly and stood. "It's time to go. We have work to do." As Zarin walked toward the door to the bridge, Krunder wiped his brow with the back of his hand, sighed, and followed his master. "Why do we hate the rebellion?" Zeal asked, as he and Marek headed for the simulators. Marek had agreed to work with Zeal to share his experiences and flight tactics. Truth to tell, Marek was flattered by the young man's interest. But this question about the rebellion was completely unexpected. "They're criminals," Marek answered a little angrily. "They're trying to disrupt the peace and order of the Empire. Little better than pirates." "I don't know. I mean, before I joined up, I heard a lot of talk." "We all heard that talk," Marek argued, "but that's all it is. I've seen what the Empire stands for. We bring peace to warring worlds. We bring order and prosperity for everyone. Some people say we bring tyranny." Marek stopped dead in his tracks. "Quiet," he ordered. "Are you trying to get yourself tossed in the brig, or worse?" Zeal lowered his eyes. It's just that I wonder about whether I really hate them." "You'll hate them well enough when they start shooting at you," Marek said, putting both hands on Zeal's shoulders and making him look up. "To the rebels, you're just a machine to be dismantled. They'd just as soon blast your TIE fighter with their laser cannons as have a good meal. Take it from me, the rebels are a bloodthirsty lot. It's you or them." "I guess you're right," said Zeal, "but I sometimes wonder." That night when he was alone, and not for the first time, Marek thought about the rebellion, and he too wondered. Zarin stood on his private observation deck, Krunda as always by his side. He stood staring at the bright stars, momentarily allowing himself to dream, to encompass them within his grasp. Nearby, the small grey planet Mylock 5 appeared as if suspended over the backdrop of stars. The 3 Habeen civilians stood, shifting uncomfortably. Zarin knew they were there, but he chose to ignore them for the moment and savor his own private thoughts. Finally, the Admiral turned and faced his visitors. He offered an inquisitive look, but said nothing. The leader took Zarin's look as an invitation to speak, and began, "Admiral, we have—" At about the same time, Zarin asked, "Now, what is it that's so urgent?" The Habeen leader stopped talking instantly, embarrassed. It was a subtle thing, but he had just been forced to accept his inferior position, and from the controlled expression on his face, he knew it. Zarin smiled and said, The Habeen drew in a deep breath, visibly controlling himself. "I'm sorry, Admiral. We came to tell you that we are worried about the Nhawak." "They have been threatening to—" The man hesitated. "Threatening to what?" asked Zarin, his voice honeyed. "Sir, Admiral, it's none of our doing, but they've said they'll sell this technology to the Rebel Alliance if we proceed with our deal with the Empire." Zarin looked angry. "They're your partners. You developed this hyperspace drive with them, did you not?" "Yes, we did, sir, but that doesn't mean—" "Nonsense. You will make sure these Nawak understand their place. If they do anything that even looks like collaboration with the enemy, I will crush them." Zarin made a fist and held it up. "Is that understood?" "It is understood," the Habeen answered. When they had left, Zarin turned to Krunda. "Major, I think it's time to take care of the Nawak. Let's get down to business." Mission 2. Attack the Nharwak. Mission briefing. The Nharwak are threatening to sell their jointly developed hyperdrive engines to the rebellion. Imperial intelligence has located one of their main bases to eliminate this technology. You will fly as a wingman in a 3-ship group of TIE bombers. Eliminate the CRVs guarding the base and destroy all ships attempting to escape. The Nharwak reprisals were almost immediate. Marek was sitting in the ready room with Zeal when the call came in. They were to scramble immediately. The Habeen research facility was under attack. The Nharwak have become more aggressive in their attempt to stop the Habeen from dealing with the Empire. They have attacked the Habeen's research facility with Y-wing fighters. If we do not intervene, the research facility will be destroyed. You will act as flight leader in a 3-ship group of TIE bombers. You must stop the Y-wings from destroying the research facility. It wasn't until after the mission that Marek learned of the loss of Zeal's ship. Nobody could tell him if Zeal was alive or not. He was told to mind his own business. Even when he went to medical, nobody would tell him anything. Eventually, he checked the casualty list. It was generally posted on the shipboard net, and some pilots checked it after each battle to see who hadn't made it. Marek had never felt compelled to check the list before. It had been hard enough to see the empty seats in the mess, or to realize that the pilots sitting in those seats were different from the ones who had sat there the previous day, new transfers to replace the dead. But Marek did check the logs, and found no mention of Zeal among the known casualties. That didn't guarantee that he'd been rescued, but offered hope. Still, he slept poorly that night, and was anxious throughout the next few days. Admiral Zarin wrote out the orders. There would be a formal rendezvous in the vicinity of Mylock IV. There, he and the Habeen leaders would formalize their technology deal, and the Habeen would be granted full Imperial citizenship. "Give this to the envoy," Zarin told Krunder. "We'll meet tomorrow." "Sir?" asked Major Krunder. "What? Is there something wrong?" Krunder shrugged. "Is it really necessary to expose yourself that way?" Zarin laughed. "You are too timid, Krunder. That's why you need me. Without me, you'd never amount to much of anything." The Admiral got a faraway look. "You have to take chances, my cautious friend. Besides, gestures are important. One must keep up the appearances. Distract them from our true goals, Krunder?" "As you wish, sir," the Major answered, taking the orders and leaving the room. After he had gone, Zarin closed his eyes and made plans for the new technology that would soon be his. "You have discovered something of possible significance," the robed man was saying. "Some of the technology the Habeen had was of a new type. We will investigate further. Good work, Stele." "There's something I don't understand," said Marek. "And what is that?" came the response, emanating from the darkness within the robe. "If the Habeen are making a deal with the Empire for new hyperdrive engines, why didn't they make a deal for this new technology as well?" "That is a good question. Perhaps they did. Perhaps there's something we should know. There is one thing you might want to be aware of," the man continued. "We have learned that the Naharwak are still dealing with the rebels. Be prepared. You will be going into battle again." Later, as he suited up for his next mission, he thought again of Zal. He had heard nothing. The thought haunted him that he had somehow been responsible for getting Zal killed. Oh, he had lost wingmen before, but none of them had asked for his advice, and he had offered none. It was the fortune of each pilot to live or die according to his skill and luck. But in Zal's case, Marek had taken an uncharacteristic responsibility, and now he regretted it. He was coming to regret everything. He didn't even feel any excitement as he anticipated going up against more rebel starfighters. There was no longer any joy in killing them. Now it was duty and duty only. Marek received his 4th battle medal in a small ceremony. He wasn't enthusiastic the way he had been the first 3 times. He simply accepted the medal, thinking back over his short but intense career. He thought of Morden and the first time he had seen the Star Destroyer Vengeance. His heart was heavy and his mind distracted. So much had changed. Or perhaps nothing much had changed, save he himself. He did know that a persistent, naive belief in the perfection of any system would get him nowhere. It was time he looked around himself and got to know why he was here, enmeshed in the intrigues of others, instead of back on Kuan with his mother. Battle for honor, Star Destroyers are huge, so huge that it's no surprise that one could be aboard one for days, even weeks, and not see an old friend. So it was that Marek had been back aboard the Protector, Admiral Harkov's flagship, for some time before running into Alamet. It had all happened suddenly, as usual. He had helped fight off the rebels aboard the Seamus and had received another battle medal. Then an Order member had approached him. "We are initiating a transfer for you, Stengel. It could be dangerous, so I want to warn you to be very careful." You will be sent back to the Protector. We are closing in on Admiral Harkov. We want someone there who can operate a starfighter." Marek's stomach seemed to turn over and his breathing became shallow. "I would prefer not to have to see Harkov again," he told the robed man. "Soon you may have your wish," answered the hood, with a small nod which only increased the blackness underneath. "Prepare to move, Stengel. Our net is closing, and you'll have the opportunity to bring in the big fish." For the first time, Stele heard what sounded like a chuckle emanate from beneath the robes of an order member. It was eerie and unpleasant. "I'll go get ready," he said hurriedly. Then he turned and walked quickly away. He had spent the first few days aboard the Protector keeping quiet and listening to the other pilots talk. But he didn't spot Alamet until the third day. Or rather, it was Alamet who spotted him. "Stele!" He turned from the hollow he had been studying and saw his friend standing nearby. "Alamet," he called, "good to see you. How are you?" Alamet looked thoughtful, and instantly Marek suspected bad news. "I guess I'm all right, but did you know Ketchel bought it?" Marek felt his heart sink. Somehow he had known there was a serious problem. But Alamet's expression suggested there was more to tell. "And Gromit?" he asked with an anxious feeling in the pit of his stomach. "Defected," said Alamet. "He's gone over to the rebel side." "What? Not possible! What are you talking about?" "Well, we had a chance to leave the ship," Alamet began. His hands were gripping each other so tightly the knuckles shone like alabaster. "We went to shore one night, and Gromit, he met this woman. I was there, and she was something else. But next thing I know, he's gone off with her. He never came back." "Oh, well," whispered Marek, almost in awe. "But that doesn't mean he's defected." "I saw him once again," said Alamet mournfully. "I managed another touchdown planet-side leave. It took some doing, trading favors and such, and I managed to find Gromit. That's when he told me that he was joining the rebellion." Alamet looked as if he wanted to kick something. His eyes were narrowed, and his face looked tense. He continued through clenched teeth. "I couldn't make any sense of it. I argued with him, told him not to throw his life away. Nothing I said made any difference. I gathered the woman had something to do with it. Whatever the reason, he was convinced that they were right and the Empire was wrong." Marek took a moment to absorb the news. "You know what this means, don't you?" he asked after a long moment during which Alamet stood rock still, practically shaking. "Yes," said the other. "It means every time we go into battle, we have to worry that we may be shooting at our friend." There was nothing more to add. They both looked at each other, wishing it weren't so. Finally, Marek managed to say the only thing he could. "But what are the odds we'll actually see him again at all?" "Small comfort," Alamet observed. "We either don't see him at all, or we have to kill him." A few days later, Admiral Harkov was pacing back and forth, hands clasped behind his back, while he engaged in a secret meeting with his closest advisers. He stopped, turned, and faced the great conference table, then leaned forward, balancing his hands on his fingertips. Behind him, an observation window showed nothing but stars. "I have word that a new pilot has joined our crew." His voice was strained. "I'm told he may be a spy for the Emperor." One of his advisers, a slightly portly man with thinning hair and a mottled scar across his nose and right cheek, shifted almost imperceptibly in his chair. Harkov rounded on the man menacingly. "And you, Vondron, what have you done about it?" The Admiral leaned forward even further, looking like some hunting animal pointing at its prey. Vondron's face grew very red, but he met Harkov's gaze directly. "If you will remember, Admiral, it was my office that informed you of this man's identity in the first place, and we have not been idle. "There will be an accident, sir." Harkov looked partially mollified, but didn't let Vondran off the hook so easily. "You know how delicate the situation is now. A few more days and—" He let the thought hang there. Everyone present was aware of the Admiral's plan to defect, and each stood to gain something from its success. "Then I have your assurance that this pilot will be eliminated." It was a statement, not a question.
"Yes, sir," answered von Drilln. "He will not survive his next mission." "Good," replied Harkov. "Then we can get on with other pressing business. We must keep up appearances for a little longer. Consequently, Marek was on his way to his next mission briefing when a robed man motioned him into a small room near the hangar. It was not their usual meeting place, and Marek was instantly on guard. "Stele, I've come to warn you. There is danger for you here." "I already knew that," Marek answered, feeling impatient at being reminded of such unpleasant facts. "The danger is quite immediate," the man insisted. "We do not know exactly what form it will take, but be on guard during your next mission. If you should run into any trouble, call for reinforcements immediately. Help will arrive. You may yet prove of value to us, and we will not let you perish." On his way to the hangar, Marek was seething with anger. First of all, this mysterious servant of the Emperor had as much as admitted that they would let him die if they didn't consider him useful anymore. Moreover, all of it had been expressed in such overly melodramatic terms that Marek was left with a sense that he was involved in a cheap holodrama. His mood became even gloomier when, upon his arrival at the hangar, he received orders to clear a minefield while 2 rookie pilots observed his technique. This bothered him for 2 reasons. First, he hated minefields. Second, despite himself, he was reminded once again of Zeal. When Marek looked more closely at the 2 rookies assigned to him, he knew. These were no rookies. Oh, they tried to look innocent enough, but they had that unmistakable glint in their eyes. No doubt, while he was concentrating on shooting the minefield, one of the rookies would make a mistake, and it would be goodbye, Stele. This charade was far too transparent to him, but he could see no reasonable option other than to go along with the charade and hope the order was as good as its word. It was perhaps the most helpless he had ever felt in his entire life. Mission briefing. You are to clear a minefield that surrounds a rebel supply cache. 2 wingmen will accompany you, but only to observe. Secret order. Follow orders, but stay alert. We have reason to believe you are in danger. If you encounter any trouble, do not hesitate to call for reinforcements. We have made special arrangements. Stele's report. I flew out toward the minefield, wary and shaking. I had to steady my hand to target and destroy the mines. I knew there was going to be trouble. Harkov came on the comlink and began accusing me of being the Emperor's stool pigeon. Well, the charade was over. I discovered that my observers were targeting me. I called for reinforcements without waiting a heartbeat, then pumped all the juice into the engines to get as much speed as possible. I began weaving and jinking. Then the FRG Osprey jumped in. Help had arrived. I headed toward the Osprey at full speed, corkscrewing to throw my pursuers off. By this time, there were 3 TIE Advanced and a pair of TIE Interceptors after me. Meanwhile, the Osprey was launching some TIs and TBs. I hoped the TIs were somehow modified, or they wouldn't stand a chance against the TAs of Harkov's fleet. I was about 2 kilometers from the Osprey when a rebel calamari cruiser jumped in. I checked the map screen and saw that the cruiser had launched some X-wings and Y-wings. The battle was heating up because the Osprey had also launched its forces. Through all this, I had to cover 6 kilometers with no shields and half the Empire and the Alliance after me. Now I had thought about hiding in the protection of the Osprey and taking out some of my pursuers. The fire from the frigate would help me, and if I kept moving, I might take a few of them out.
This was extremely risky, of course, but I had discovered that while I corkscrewed, my pursuers got in each other's way, often shooting each other instead of me. It was too good to pass up the opportunity to watch them destroy themselves. I had to keep checking my upward view to make sure I didn't collide with the osprey, however. Finally, when I tired of the fun, I entered the hangar and cursed Harkov roundly as I debarked and looked for someone to throttle. "Escaped? What do you mean he escaped?" Harkov was livid. "Do you know what this means?" he screamed. "Sir?" squeaked Vondrel, who looked as if he had physically shrunken into his seat. "It means, you idiot, that they know everything. It means we're war with the Empire." His voice continued to rise in volume and intensity. "And it means we didn't get anything from the cursed alliance." Harkov's expression turned cold. There was no other warning. He slowly drew his blaster and, without another word, shot Vondrel in the chest. The uniform burned away, and the blaster ate away at the man's body. There was no blood, as the wound was instantly cauterized. Vondrel's body slumped forward, his head hitting the table, then slid to the side and fell with a dull thud to the floor. "Clean up this mess," Harkov barked at no one in particular. "And the rest of you, get busy." Marek had arrived safely aboard the MFRG Osprey. He was met immediately by a representative of the Order. "Well done, Stele. You made it. We now have incontrovertible evidence of Harkov's deception and treachery. He will be brought before Lord Vader and dealt with appropriately." But Marek was still angry from his last meeting with the Order. "You can tell your masters that I'm through doing their bidding. I don't care how many invisible awards you give me, I've had it." Marek started to walk off dramatically, but the robed figure uttered 3 words which stopped him dead in his tracks. "Harkov murdered Morden." A long moment of silence passed, during which Marek's anger worked its way into a white rage. But the target was no longer the Order. It was Harkov he hated. His voice was quiet when he finally broke the silence. "What is it you want me to do?" he asked. "Help us find Harkov," was the answer. The pace of operations against Harkov had to be unrelenting. They could not give him time to adjust, to plan, or to act. There was just time to witness the arrival of the first squadron of TIE advanced fighters. Marek volunteered to pilot one of them. As usual, the Order ordered him to inspect any unknown transports or shuttles, and that's how he discovered Harkov. Marek was the one who found the ship with Harkov on board, but nobody came to capture it. He was under orders from the Order not to shoot Harkov. But he wanted revenge for Morden, wanted so badly to press the stud and watch the lasers burn the Toten to molten, twisted wreckage. Only fear of reprisals from the Order prevented him from doing as he wished. He called in the location of the transport, but help did not arrive before the Toten had made it to the relative safety of the platform. "We had not anticipated his going to the platform," the robed figure admitted. It was a minor moment of triumph for Marek. The Order didn't know everything after all. "It is fortunate in the long run, however," the man continued. "Now your mission will be to attack the platform, not the Protector. Be thankful. You do not want to go up against a Star Destroyer." The attack on the platform took several hours to plan, but all the while, probe droids kept watch to be sure Harkov did not escape. While Marek awaited his next briefing, he took a moment to visit the hangar. He wanted a closer look at the TIE advanced fighter he had just flown. It was a wonderful craft, fast, maneuverable, and powerful. Would he get to fly it again soon? While he was in the hangar, there was a commotion at the flight bridge. Marek strolled over to investigate. The flight controller was tracking an unidentified spacecraft. "Unidentified TIE interceptor. Stand by. Do not approach. Give ID. Captain Trace, late of the Protector. I'm looking for a way out of this mess, guys. Let me in." The flight controller motioned to his assistant.
"Activate the tractor beam and tow this joker in," he said. "Right," responded the assistant as he complied. On a view screen above the flight control deck, a small starfighter appeared. The assistant controller manipulated a set of controls, and a blue beam entracked the interceptor. "I know this guy," Marek offered.
"He was on Harkov's ship when I was stationed there." The controller glanced in Marek's direction. "It's not my concern, boy, and it's not yours. Just go on about your business." Marek waited while they drew the interceptor into the hangar. A contingent of stormtroopers arrived and took the pilot away. Marek stayed out of sight, and Trace never saw him. Marek hurried to find the Order's representative, not quite sure why he cared. "They've brought in a pilot who might be able to help you," he told the man breathlessly. "He was on the Protector." The robed figure nodded. "Your friend, Captain Trace?" "How did you know?" Marek asked in amazement. "Captain Trace is working for us now. We had to get him off the Protector immediately. Don't worry, he'll be fine. Prepare instead for your next mission. We believe an attack on the rebel platform will flush out our prey. Find Harkov, and we will capture him, this time without fail. Mission 5. Capture Harkov. Mission briefing. The traitor Harkov is hiding on the rebel platform. It's time to bring him to justice. You will fly as a wingman in a 4-ship group of assault gunboats. Your primary task is to be sure that Harkov does not escape in a shuttle or transport. Also, you must help take out the platform's defenses, which include starfighters and mines. After 3 minutes, special assault transports will arrive to begin a concentrated attack on the platform's shields. Secret order. Disable any craft attempting to flee the platform. Find Harkov if he tries to escape. Steckel's report. The gunboat was sluggish after flying the TIE Avenger, but you didn't get to choose your ship. I came out of hyperspace about 5 kilometers from the platform. Checked the map and saw the minefield. It was laid out as 2 3x3 arrays, one above and one below the platform. Meanwhile, some X-Wings were attacking, so I launched some missiles, then turned my attention to the minefield. I was able to take a few mines out with missiles until I got closer, then I switched to cannons, taking out a few. But an A-Wing got on my tail, and I set my shield recharge to 0 and went after him. I noticed then that the getaway had left the platform, so I closed in on him to inspect. That's where, once again, I found Harkov trying to get away. Harkov was taken to the garret, where Lord Vader awaited him. Bitter and defiant to the end, Harkov tried to resist the legendary Jedi powers of the Lord of the Sith, but like so many others before him, he paid the inevitable price. The troopers held Harkov immobilized as the hatch opened with a pneumatic hiss. Lord Vader stood beyond the hatch. "Welcome, Admiral Harkov," he intoned, in a voice that might have almost been cordial under other circumstances. "We have matters to discuss." Harkov simply glared. "Where is the location of your fleet?" Vader demanded. But still, Harkov was silent. Then the Dark Jedi lifted his hand and pointed it, palm upward, toward the former admiral, who rose in the air as if by magic. Then the man broke completely and began screaming, but his screams were cut short as Vader closed his fist. The sound of crushed bone was the last sound Harkov made as his screams were choked off. His body fell to the ground, and Vader walked off, his strange, mechanized breathing the only sound in the room. Of course, Marek had no idea of Harkov's ultimate fate. The Order simply told him that he would be punished, and that his crimes were of the most serious sort. Marek and everyone else in the Imperial Navy knew what that meant. So Harkov was undone, and Morden's killer brought to justice. Why, then, did Marek not feel some elation? Why did he feel nothing more than an empty feeling inside? A few days later, Marek was resting when someone signaled outside his cabin. He made the door open and admitted his visitor. It was Trace. "Good to see you again, Stele," he said. Marek was wary. What did he really know about this man? "Yes, I suppose so," he answered laconically, then added, "What brings you here?" "I just wanted to apologize," Trace said, sitting on Marek's bunk, there being only one chair in the room. "I know I acted strangely before, and I never had a chance to tell you how I felt." "And how is that?" Marek replied. "How did you feel?" "Look," Trace said a little defensively, "I know you are involved with the Order. They told me so when they recruited me. So you almost had me fooled at one point, but I knew you weren't entirely what you appeared to be." "The problem is, Captain," said Marek, "I'm probably exactly what I appear to be. I'm just a pilot who takes orders." "Right," agreed Trace. "Anyway, I didn't want to disturb you. I just wanted to let you know I'm a friend, okay?" "I guess so," answered Marek. "But my experience with friends hasn't been so good lately," he continued with a wry grin. "Maybe it's better not to push your luck." The captain grinned back. "I once knew another pilot a lot like you. We were friends. I think I can take the risk." Battle 6. Arms Race. Admiral Zarin returned Marek's salute. "Welcome to my research facility," he said warmly. "I've heard a lot about you, Stele. Your reputation precedes you." "I'm happy to be here, Admiral, and a little embarrassed that you should bother with me," he told the Admiral. "I'm sure anything you've heard is exaggerated." They stood in a large office aboard the deep space platform where Zarin's high-technology research was taking place. For reasons known only to the Order, Marek had been transferred to this facility. It was the first time he had been based on an outpost platform since his first assignment on PLTD-34. After the events of the recent past, he no longer dismissed the relative quiet of life on a platform as dull or boring. Zarin invited Marek to join him by the large viewport, where they could see the various starfighter models being tested, as well as several cargo ships in different phases of loading and unloading. "They look like impressive starfighters," Marek commented. "Oh, those," Zarin replied. "Those are only modified versions of the TIE Advanced. We have something far more impressive to offer." "I would like very much to see them," Marek suggested, but Zarin only laughed. A short sound. "I'll bet you would," the Admiral said, "but all in good time. All in good time." As Marek stared out at the stars and the various craft that floated above the platform, he had the distinct impression that Zarin was watching him, testing him somehow. The Admiral seemed quite friendly, and memories of Morden flooded in suddenly. Could Zarin turn out to be a good friend the way Morden had been? He turned away from the window and looked around the large room. An oversized desk dominated one end of the office, and next to it stood a stocky man in a major's uniform. The man looked straight ahead and showed no sign of noticing Marek. But there was a sense of something poised within him, something dangerous, and Marek suspected that this was not a man to turn your back on. The desk was almost bare. A few hollow discs and some unusual artifacts were all Marek could see. He continued his sweep of the room, coming finally to Admiral Zarin himself. The Admiral was almost a head taller than Marek, and was staring down at Marek unabashedly. "You have a very impressive office," Marek said, feeling awkward and a little out of his depth. Zarin continued to stare, an amused smile playing around the corners of his mouth. "Thank you, Stele. Can I call you Marek?" "If you wish, sir." Marek found it increasingly difficult to meet the Admiral's frank gaze. He looked back out the window. "Thank you for coming to see me," Zarin said, breaking the silence. It sounded like a dismissal. "I hope to have an opportunity to get to know you better. Pilots of your caliber are the foundation of the Empire's strength, don't you think?" he asked casually. Marek answered without thinking. "I don't know, Admiral Zarin. I think the commanders, the ones who decide on policy and plan the tactics, are the backbone of the Empire. Me, I'm just a worker who does his job. Anyway, it's the Emperor who's the real foundation of the Empire, isn't it?" "Indeed," replied Zarin. "Indeed, you are quite right. Thank you, Stele. Marek, I look forward to our next meeting." Marek left the Admiral's office feeling confused. What had just happened? He could swear that some very significant conversation had just taken place in the closing moments of the meeting, but for the life of him he had no idea what it meant. Admiral Zarin sent down orders for Marek to join him in his private dining room. 2 stormtroopers arrived to escort him. He had the strange feeling that one of the stormtroopers was staring fixedly at him, though it was hard to tell. You could never see a stormtrooper's face after all. Still, it made him edgy. After the situation with Harkov, he knew there could be enemies around any corner. He considered asking Admiral Zarin for some extra protection, but changed his mind. Still, he kept his distance from the stormtroopers and watched them for any suspicious move. He made it to Zarin without incident, and the Admiral rose instantly to greet him. "Ah, Marek, it is good of you to join me," he said with remarkable humility for a man of such rank. "I had wanted to speak with you more." Now, when Morden had befriended him, Marek had been a raw recruit, and only the fact that he had saved Morden's life had justified the friendship that eventually developed. But now he was an accomplished and decorated pilot, and Marek found himself thinking, why shouldn't the Admiral be friendly? After all, in his own way, Marek had achieved some notoriety, perhaps even a little fame for his role in bringing Harkov to justice. But it wouldn't do to act arrogant. He knew that. "I am flattered that you find my company enjoyable," Marek said in his best courtly manner. He almost bowed, having heard that to be the custom among some in the Emperor's circles, but he did not. Zarin motioned toward the table, which was set with a variety of unfamiliar but delicious-looking dishes. "Please share my meager fare," Zarin said, continuing the mannered dialogue. "It isn't much, but I hope you will find it to your liking." In all his life, Marek had never seen such a spread, and he wondered what it had cost the Admiral to set a table like this. Surely he didn't eat this way all the time. Marek could hardly restrain himself. The food looked and smelled that good. At the same time, he couldn't quite shake the fact that there had to be a price to pay. What did Zarin really want? It didn't take long to find out. Oh, he was subtle enough. He didn't come right out and say it, but Marek could read between the lines. "That business with Harkov was terrible," he said over a bite of 5-spiced Hoxha steak. "I think he must have been a very disturbed individual." Marek nodded, sampling something that closely resembled grass cuttings, but melted in the mouth, leaving a vapor that filled his head with a sweet burning pleasure lasting several seconds, then stopped. Zarin watched appreciatively as Marek momentarily lost himself in the sensation. Then he added, "His punishment was certainly appropriate." "Whose?" Marek asked, having a really hard time concentrating on the subject of conversation. "Harkov, of course," Zarin replied, gently insistent. "I think he got off easy," Marek answered venomously. "So you believe the Emperor is right?" It was an odd question, and for a moment Marek was distracted from the food. "Right?" he asked. "Right about what?" Zarin raised a small crystal goblet to his lips, sipped, and returned it to its place on the table. He picked up his fork, appeared to study it for a moment. Finally, he spoke again. "Do you feel that the Emperor is infallible?" Marek almost choked. This was almost treasonable, and it was only because Admiral Zarin was such a high-ranking officer that Marek even considered the question. It was commonly acknowledged that Emperor Palpatine was beyond all scrutiny. "I don't see how I could possibly answer that question," he told Zarin. "It's not possible for me to know." That seemed safe enough, and the Admiral didn't immediately have him arrested, so he decided he had answered correctly. "So you approve of the way the Empire is run?" This had to be some loyalty test, Marek thought. And the fact was, he had been thinking about these very issues lately. Was Zarin somehow privy to his innermost thoughts? Was he truly disloyal? There was something about Zarin that put him on the defensive, but he wanted to trust him. He felt nothing but friendly intentions from the Admiral, and he hoped he could be candid. "To be honest," he told Zarin, "I think the Empire could do better by uniting all the planets peacefully. I sometimes wonder why the Rebel Alliance is still in existence when we so constantly defeat them in battle." "So you're saying you have doubts," suggested Zarin. "No," answered Marek without thinking. "Not doubts exactly, just a little confusion. Was there something in the food that made him talk too freely?" To Marek's immense relief, Zarin changed the subject just then and began talking about the new TIE Defender starfighter. During the rest of the meal, Zarin was affable, congratulating Marek on his successes and describing the state of the Empire in glowing terms that somewhat belied the questions he had asked previously. At one point, Zarin's assistant, Major Krunder, appeared, whispered something to the Admiral, and then left. Zarin stood slowly, wiping his mouth with a silky napkin, and excused himself. "I'm sorry, Marek. I must attend to some urgent business. Please stay as long as you like. There's still plenty of food. I hope you have enjoyed our little moment together." Marek thanked Zarin, also rising from the table, but after the Admiral was gone, he sat again and continued eating, unable to leave so many delicacies untasted. He also thought about the Admiral's questions and wondered what ulterior motives the man might have. He was stuffed full of food when the robed man caught up with him. "You will be going on a mission soon to escort the transfer of TIE Defender prototypes to an escort carrier. Be on the alert. We are concerned that all is not as it seems at this research facility. Do you have any questions?" Marek belched rather loudly. He had been about to voice his concerns about Zarin, but now he was too embarrassed. The Order representative said nothing at all, and Marek tried to imagine the sour expression the man probably wore beneath his hood. It almost made him laugh. Perhaps he had drunk a little too much Norvanian grog with the Admiral after all. Mission 2. Prevent Rebel Ambush. Mission Brief. The cargo ferry Stele is carrying the TIE Defenders to a rendezvous point near Vinson Nila 5. There, it will transfer the prototypes to the escort carrier Hindenburg. You will fly wingman in a 3-ship group of TIE Advanced and sweep the area before the arrival of the Stele. Make sure nothing disturbs this transfer operation. Secret order. Lord Vader is displeased at the breach of security at Admiral Zarin's facility. It is suspicious, as we know Zarin to be an exceedingly careful commander. We want you to take a close look at any rebel craft that may show up at this rendezvous. Marek met with Admiral Zarin once more after the convoy had successfully delivered the TIE Defenders. Zarin was far more serious at this meeting. He invited Marek to take a seat in his office and sat on the other side of his desk. Major Krunder stood by his right side. "I've come to the conclusion, still, that you are a loyalist," Zarin began. Marek said nothing. "I would like to invite you to lead a special squadron under my command. Would that please you?" he asked. Marek was taken aback. He hadn't considered such a possibility. He also wondered what the Order would think of this offer. Would they let him accept? "I am flattered," he replied diplomatically. The Admiral smiled. "If I were to give you an opportunity to lead a squadron of the most advanced starfighters in the galaxy, what would you say?" "I can't think of a better opportunity, Admiral," Marek told him. "But I wonder if I deserve it." Zarin went on as if Marek hadn't said anything, casually fingering a ceremonial knife. "You would be responsible to me first, of course," he stated.
Could you place your loyalty in me, do you think? Marek didn't stop to think about what Zarin was asking. Of course, I am loyal to you, Admiral Zarin. You are an admiral in the Imperial Navy. There's no question of it, he said. Marek was beginning to feel uncomfortably warm. You will serve me? Zarin asked. Yes, Marek said despite himself. Of course. Trace, what are you doing here? Marek had been lying down, trying to catch up on his sleep. His meeting with Zarin had left him drained. He didn't know what he had agreed to, or what exactly had happened between him and the Admiral, but he was feeling very agitated and had come to his cabin to be alone, to rest and to think. The door had announced a visitor. The research facility was full of little technological touches like that, and in walked Trace. Only now he was a major. I get around better these days, he answered. They talked about starfighters and space battles a while, standard pilot stuff about close calls and heroic moments. Then Trace turned serious. He looked around the room as if expecting to see someone else there. Marek, I know you and I have had occasional differences, but I want to ask you a very serious question. Oh no, thought Marek, more questions. But he nodded. Go on. Trace was quiet a moment before he spoke. His eyes bored into Marek's, looking for something. Apparently he found what he was looking for, because he said, I've been thinking lately about the Empire and about the rebellion. Marek felt his heart skip. Was this another test? Why was everyone questioning his loyalty all of a sudden? He was tempted to say, so have I, but he kept silent. Go on. Trace was quiet a moment before he spoke. His eyes bored into Marek's, looking for something. Apparently he found what he was looking for, because he said, I've been thinking lately about the Empire and about the rebellion. Marek felt his heart skip. Was this another test? Why was everyone questioning his loyalty all of a sudden? He was tempted to say, so have I, but he kept silent. Go on. Trace was quiet a moment before he spoke. His eyes bored into Marek's, looking for something. Apparently he found what he was looking for, because he said, I've been thinking lately about the Empire and about the rebellion. Marek felt his heart skip. Was this another test? Why was everyone questioning his loyalty all of a sudden? He was tempted to say, so have I, but he kept silent. Go on. Trace was quiet a moment before he spoke. His eyes bored into Marek's, looking for something. Apparently he found what he was looking for, because he said, I've been thinking lately about the Empire and about the rebellion. Marek felt his heart skip. Was this another test? Why was everyone questioning his loyalty all of a sudden? He was tempted to say, so have I, but he kept silent. I mean, continued Trace, how do we know we serve the side of right? Marek's answer appeared to surprise Trace. Does it really matter which side we serve? He asked. To me it does, Trace countered. I've been thinking about your friend Gromit. I heard he defected. Marek bristled. That has nothing to do with me. By what right did Trace bring up Gromit's defection, especially since it had been so much on Marek's mind of late? Still, Trace persisted, you were friends. What do you suppose could have made him switch sides? Marek decided to be frank. I've come to the conclusion that loyalty is nothing like what I used to think it was. I think we are loyal either out of fear or out of an expectation of personal gain. Trace's eyebrows rose. So you don't think loyalty can be based on ideals or belief in something greater than yourself? I used to, Marek responded, but now I wonder. Would it surprise you to find out that I am intensely loyal to an ideal? No, answered Marek slowly. No, I don't think I would be surprised. The question is, what ideal is it that inspires your loyalty? Yes, agreed Trace, that is the question. And, Marek prompted, and if I tell you I want your promise, no matter what I say, that you will keep it to yourself.
That's asking a lot, Marek told him. Nevertheless, Trace said, "All right, you have my promise." Marek realized suddenly that he was excited. There was something terrible and yet fascinating about this conversation. Trace didn't hesitate. "My name is not Trace," he declared. "I'm Hamo Blastwell, an officer of the Rebel Alliance." Marek's mouth fell open. He looked at the man before him in utter disbelief. Speechless, he waited for something to happen, the roof to fall in, perhaps. But nothing happened, and Trace Blastwell shrugged. "I think there's a decency about you, Marek. You've never been an Imperial clone or butcher. You know what your problem is?" Marek still couldn't speak. He just shook his head. "Your problem is you haven't seen the truth. You've seen what the Empire wants you to see. The Alliance is dedicated to the freedom of all beings, not just the privileged few. The Emperor and his minions are controlled by the dark side of the Force. You must come to understand this to grasp the terrible nature of the Empire." Finally, Marek found his voice. "Major, I don't know what you are talking about. Only a short time ago, I would have turned you in for what you've just said, promise or not. But I have been confused to the breaking point recently. Everyone somehow wants me. First Morden, then the Order, the Emperor, Zarin, and now you and your bloody rebels. I don't know what Grummet found on your side of the fence, but I'm tired of everyone pulling on me. Now get the hell out and count yourself lucky that I don't expose you." Trace Blastwell turned to leave, a pained expression on his face, which moved Marek, despite his anger. "Listen, Major," he added, "I will think about everyone's position, I promise. I can't say you're wrong, I can't say you're right, I just don't know. Can you understand that? I don't even know if I believe anything anymore." The truth is, at that moment, he felt like crying for the first time since his father's abduction. Everything had been so simple. Be wild. Fight. Destroy. Follow orders. Now nothing made sense, and he was caught with no loyalty to give, while everyone demanded it from him. His decision? Do nothing for the moment. Change could only bring disaster. So he let Trace Blastwell go. He did not turn the imposter in, but Marek did avoid further contact with him. He tried to go back to the life he had led, to fly his missions, destroy his enemies, and not think twice about it. Unfortunately, the events of his life did not allow him to keep hiding. Elsewhere, Admiral Zarin was studying a recent communiqué from Imperial High Command on Coruscant. To Admiral Zarin, "We have recently discovered treachery within the corporate sector. The traitors at Galactic Electronics have been selling their new technology to the rebels. You have been selected to lead a punitive raid on the main Galactic Electronics research platform. This raid should serve as an example to all who would betray the Empire. Recover any technology. Take all personnel prisoner. Destroy the base." "Major Krunder," said Zarin after reading the message, "it's time to return to the glory." In the aftermath of the raid on Galactic Electronics, there was a flurry of activity aboard Admiral Zarin's flagship, the Imperial-class star destroyer Glory. Hundreds of prisoners were loaded into various holds and cells. Some were subsequently shipped off to other facilities, but still dozens of them remained. There was a steady stream of shuttles and transports coming and going from the Glory, though there was little for Marek to do but watch, listen, and wait for the next assignment. He was in his cabin again. He had taken to spending more time alone of late, when the someone appeared at the door. When he opened it, a stormtrooper stood on the other side. Seeing a stormtrooper at the door is not an experience anyone looks forward to, and Marek was no exception. It generally meant trouble, and Marek could see no reason to expect anything else. "Come with me," the stormtrooper ordered, his voice distorted from within his white helmet. There was no point in arguing or asking where he was going. Stormtroopers never volunteered information and would not respond to any but the most basic of requests. Marek left his cabin, and the stormtrooper said, "That way," pointing in the direction of the Star Destroyer's stern. The stormtrooper guided him into a little-used area of the ship, which was temporarily functioning as a holding area for prisoners. They came to a small cabin near the holding cells. The stormtrooper told Marek to enter the room and wait. Marek did as he was told, sitting down on a small bench that ran along one side of a long table. He waited. Minutes later, the stormtrooper returned with a prisoner. The older man had a shock of long white hair and was very thin. That's all Marek noticed before his face came into view. "Father!" he cried, clambering to his feet. The man looked up. His face was etched deeply with lines of worry, and his eyes were downcast and dull. He looked very tired. It seemed to take a moment for those eyes to focus on the Imperial officer before him, to see past the uniform and realize who it was. "Marek?" the man asked slowly, belief very slowly penetrating his shock. "Father, it's you! It's really you! I had just about given up." The man looked confused. "How long has it been?" he asked. "Months? A year? I don't even know myself," Marek said. The man stood a moment more, obviously trying to reconcile what to him was an impossible situation. Then he asked, "And your mother, how is she?" Marek reached out and hugged his father. "She was fine the last time I saw her. The war's over," he added, though it seemed to mean very little anymore. Marek suddenly realized that the stormtrooper was still standing at the doorway. Still hanging on to his father, he asked, "Why did you bring him here? And how did you know?" To Marek's complete shock, the stormtrooper began unlatching his helmet. Slowly he raised it over his head. Marek had never seen a stormtrooper without his helmet. Few people had, and he was terrified for a moment before his terror melted into immense relief. "Pargo, Pargo, I thought I would never see you again either." There were tears in his old friend's eyes. "I've seen you from time to time, heard a lot about your exploits in and out of starfighters," he said, "but I could never talk to you. It's not allowed. I've missed you, Pargo. We used to have so much fun in the old swoop days on Quan. It's not like that anymore," Marek said sadly. "No," agreed Pargo. "Nothing is like it was." Marek turned back to his father. "There's so much to catch up on. I'm so happy to see you again." But his father had stiffened. "So I'm correct in assuming that you've become a hotshot pilot for this gang of thieves and bullies?" Marek stepped back a pace. "Yes, father. They ended the war with the Bordali. They brought peace to Tarun." "No doubt they did. And they brought servitude and discrimination, brutality." "Marek, did you bother to see what effect Imperial rule had on your home world? Didn't you wonder why I didn't return to Quan? I was taken prisoner by the Bordali, but it was the Imperials I was made to serve." The bitterness in his father's voice was palpable. "Didn't I teach you anything?" he asked at last. Marek was crushed. He had lived for this moment. Finding his father had always been his dream. And now... But Pargo interrupted. "I'm sorry, Marek. I must take him back to the cell. If I don't bring him back soon, they'll know something's wrong." Marek knew he was right. There was no way to simply release a prisoner of the Empire, and he didn't want anything to happen to Pargo. "Father, I'm sorry," he said. "I've been so confused. I'll get you out of this." He faced Pargo. "Thank you, my friend. Will I be able to see you from time to time?" he asked. Pargo looked down. "It's very risky for me to do anything outside my orders. I'll try to see you again, but don't ever come looking for me. I'll find you." When they had gone, Marek felt ironically more alone than he had ever felt in his entire life. He went immediately in search of one of the robed men. "Please," he begged, "I'll do whatever you want. Please let my father go back to Quan." "You already do whatever we ask," the Order's envoy replied. "I have served you," Marek replied, unquestioningly. "I have done everything that you've asked of me. I will continue to do so if you will free my father. Please, it is all I ask." "We will consider it," the robed figure told him. "For now, however, prepare to be transferred. Your usefulness aboard the Glory has ended. You will be transferred to Darth Vader's flagship, the Garrett." "Will I see my father again?" Marek asked. "I've got so much to explain." "Perhaps," was the cryptic answer. Battle 7. Treachery at Otega. Marek was transferred to the ISD Garrett, where he was assigned to an elite squadron of pilots. Some of the other pilots were familiar faces encountered before on one ship or another. Some he had never met. He remained somewhat distant from the crowds, however, and chose to keep his own company. Marek's squadron began training on the new TIE Defenders, which were the most powerful and deadly starfighters he'd ever seen. There were only a few defenders in operation, but most of them were on Vader's flagship. The sleek power of the TIE Defender was almost enough to rekindle Marek's martial spirit. Almost, but not quite. He had heard nothing from the Order about his father, and worried constantly about him, which contributed enormously to the continual inner battle he waged with his loyalties. Thankfully, he had been moved away from Zarin's influence. Marek realized in retrospect that he had never been comfortable with the Admiral, but had succumbed to the man's power. To some unknown charisma. Yet the opportunity Zarin had offered had seemed genuine, and at another time he would have seized upon it enthusiastically. Now, flying the Defender in close maneuvers, Marek could only dream of returning to Quan and leaving the whole war behind him. Within days, however, word passed throughout the Garrett that the remains of Harkov's fleet had been located. There were briefings and preparations for a massive operation, and Marek was swept into the flurry of activity. For the time being, he was able to forget his endless questions and concentrate on battle readiness. Mission briefing. Even though their leader has been neutralized, the remains of Harkov's defecting forces have decided to continue their treachery. Destroy the containers destined to resupply the Protector, and protect the interdictor cruiser Harpax from counter-attack. You will face a formidable force of Imperial and Rebel starfighters. The Harpax was still in danger, and all available pilots were scrambled to go to her defense. It was critical that the Harpax survive. Without her, the defecting fleet could escape into hyperspace. The first order of priority was to destroy the FRG Arkaga. Marek overheard two pilots comparing notes in the few moments between launches. "I didn't find much use for the new weapon," one pilot said. It was Sayu. He was known to be an ace shooter. The other pilot was Prakri, one of the newer pilots aboard the Garrett. He shook his head. "I don't know what you're talking about. I used the beam to keep my target lined up. Once they were caught, I just fired away." Sayu began to buckle up his flight suit, preparing for battle again. "Do it however you want. By the time I get close enough for the beam to do any good, I've already got the enemy where I want him. Fragged." Prakari laughed. "Either way, it's a dead enemy. That's the point, isn't it?" Saryu smiled savagely. "You got it, Saryu. That's the only point." Marek finished his battle preparations, thinking about what Saryu and Prakari had been saying. He used to feel the same way, and when he was in battle, the fierceness returned. It was kill or be killed. But when the battle was over, that was another story altogether. Mission briefing. The Harpax is in trouble. It is surrounded by enemy forces and is not equipped to hold them off for long. You will fly wingman in a 2-ship group of TIE Advanced. Your mission is to launch 2 heavy bombs at the FRG Arkaga. You must buy time for the Harpax until more help can arrive. My flight leader and I flew close until we could practically count the rivets on the Akagar's hull, then let loose. Our bombs hit, and the Akagar's shields were pretty much gone. I called for a reload and headed back toward the garret to pick up more bombs. After my second run on the Akagar, she was down to partial hull strength, so I switched to cannons and took a couple of firing runs on her. She went up in a glorious fireball, and I looked around for someone else to attack. I kept after various starfighter groups until the garret arrived. Then I stuck around a little longer, helping to mop up the enemy, even though my primary mission was complete. Not once during the battle did I consider that my friend Gromit might be flying one of those enemy craft. The envoy was waiting for him when he came out of the hangar.
"Marek Stele," said the robe. "Was there really a man inside?" Marek stopped and followed the man into a quiet corridor. The Order liked to meet this way. They couldn't just talk in an office somewhere. "Be careful, Stele. The danger mounts with every moment." By this time, Marek was used to the Order's dramatic ways, but this was too strange. What was he supposed to reply to that statement? The silence was too disturbing. He had to say something. "Is there a specific task for me?" he asked bluntly. The robe shook. "No. Be alert. Be wary. Danger may come from unexpected quarters." The man turned and walked away. With a slight shudder, Marek, too, turned and headed for the pilot's waiting area. The next mission would soon be upon him, and he needed something to drink and a moment to breathe.
He always had the impression that the Order knew much more than they were telling him, and that if they would only come out with it, he'd be a lot better off. Or perhaps they knew much less and were just trying to keep him edgy. If that was the case, they were succeeding admirably. At length he stepped into the pilot's lounge, which was a cavernous hall filled with groups of pilots eating, drinking, playing various card and board games, or just talking. Pilots tended to congregate in groups, and on a Star Destroyer there were so many pilots at any given time that it was next to impossible to meet them all. Perhaps that's why he hadn't run into Zell before that moment. "Marek!" The voice was familiar. Turning toward the sound, he recognized his former friend and student. "Zale, you're alive." Marek studied the man who stood before him. This was not the raw recruit, the uncertain pupil, the confident but terrified young man. This was a pilot who stood before him. Zeel laughed. "I'm not only alive, but if you had any powers of observation, you'd see that I've already made it to lieutenant." Marek smiled, but inside he was disturbed. "Congratulations." He saluted, still smiling, then motioned toward a nearby table. "Can you sit for a moment?" he asked. Zeel took a seat, saying, "I know we have only a few minutes before our next mission. I just wanted to thank you for the help you gave me before." Marek studied Zeel's face, especially the eyes. They were definitely the eyes of a pilot, a killer. Marek felt unaccountably sad. "You seem to have done well with it," he said absently. For his own part, Zeyal was carefully scrutinizing his former teacher. "Your reputation has grown, Marek, but you seem different somehow. Has something happened?" Marek shrugged. "Too much," was all he said. "Too much, too little." He shook his head to clear out the confusion. "It's all right. I've just had a lot on my mind lately." "If we get out of all this, I'd like to hear about it," said Zeyal. "Right now, though, we've got some defectors to eliminate. Time to cleanse the wounds to the Empire's integrity." "Yes," Marek replied. "At least that's simple enough." Mission briefing. This mission is an all-out effort to destroy the defecting fleet. You are to pay particular attention to the destruction of the capital ships. You must also protect the ISD Garret from enemy attack. You will lead a 3-ship group of TIE Advanced Starfighters. Look for reinforcements during the mission from Admiral Zarin's forces. It was time to finish this defection nonsense for good. The traitors would be punished. That's the way the Empire works. So we were going to destroy the Protector and the Warhawk for good measure. The Harpax was under a heavy attack by rebel CRVs Triumph 1 and Triumph 2. I headed in at top speed and attacked the CRVs and some escort shuttles from Spitfire Group. I was able to catch the escort shuttles in a crossfire, and they took some damage from the CRVs. I took out the CRVs with torpedoes and cannons, quickly disabling their guns and then finishing them off. I also shot a few torpedoes at the escort shuttles to avoid having to get in too close. The Harpax was taking a beating, though, and I was starting to wonder where Admiral Zarin's forces were, when, on cue, they appeared. That fool, Zarin! Now I understood why he had made me so nervous. He was deranged. He was attacking the Imperial ships. I lost the Harpax about then. It just took too much damage. But I kept after the starfighters that remained until there were none left. In retrospect, I realized that I might have saved the Harpax if I had paid more attention to B-Wing Group Blue when they appeared. I had been too busy with the CRVs. Immediately after the battle with the defectors, Marek was detained by 4 anonymous stormtroopers who grabbed him and said, "Come along, Stele, you're wanted on the bridge." They weren't particularly gentle about it, and they hustled him along almost at a run. The bridge was in chaos. Technicians were busy repairing the damage the Garrett had suffered during the attack. Others were running around doing the mysterious jobs that kept a starship of the size of a Star Destroyer running. In the commander's chair was the Dark Lord himself, Darth Vader. Marek gasped involuntarily when he first saw Lord Vader. All the other activity on the bridge ceased to exist, and it was as if Marek was suddenly enveloped in silence. The only person he heard was Vader's. The only person he saw was Vader. He stood at one end of a tunnel. Vader stood at the other. "Welcome, Colonel Stele," he said, and his voice resonated through Marek like a great bass drum. He couldn't speak. He managed a salute, or thought he did. The truth was, he didn't know the difference at that moment between intent and action. But the Dark Lord didn't wait for a reply. "I've called you here, Colonel Stele, because of your recent association with Admiral Zarin. Tell me what you know about Zarin," he demanded. Marek found himself speaking, saying things he didn't even realize he had known. "Admiral Zarin is ambitious. He has been hoarding technology in the hopes of creating an advanced force to use to take over the Empire. He asked me to lead a special squadron of advanced starfighters. I think he intends to overthrow the Empire." He heard himself speaking, but he was detached from the words, as if it were someone else who spoke. The only other sound was that of Lord Vader's strange mechanical breathing. Part of Marek, the part that still represented his own will, realized how frightened he was, and how eerie this all seemed. But there was no thrill of emotion, no adrenaline pulsing through him. He felt like a puppet, and the most frightening aspect of it all was that he didn't care in the least. Meanwhile, Vader had considered Marek's words. "You have confirmed what we believed. So much we had surmised. It seems as if Zarin has developed some dangerous plans, and we believe the Emperor to be in great danger. I want you to join me, Colonel, on an urgent mission. You have trained in the new starfighter. I want you to accompany me and break through Zarin's lines. I must get to Coruscant immediately. Come, now." As suddenly as it had come on him, the silence was broken, and he was once again on the bridge of the Garrett. Vader stood and walked down to the deck, brushing past Marek. "Come," he said, and Marek followed, dazed. His only coherent thought was, "He's awfully tall." Meanwhile, Admiral Zarin was handed a small hollow. Quickly he shoved it into the viewer. "It shows the plans for the new TIE Defender," said Major Crunda. "One of the officers was trying to sneak it off the ship." Zarin studied the hollow image for a moment, as if he had never seen it before. He looked up slowly, and when he spoke, his voice was strangely calm. "Show me that officer." "I'm afraid he's escaped," Crunda answered with obvious reluctance.
"What was his name?" "Trace, Sir Commander, Trace." Mission 4. TIE Defender. Mission free. Lord Vader must warn the Emperor of Zarin's treachery, but the only craft that has a chance to succeed is the new TIE Defender. There are only a few available, and you will lead a 5-ship group in an attempt to break free of Zarin's trap and join the FRG Osprey. From there, Lord Vader will be able to get to Coruscant and warn the Emperor. Do not attempt to issue any orders to the Dark Lord. Marek boarded the Osprey with Lord Vader and the other pilots from the escape mission. Almost immediately, the Osprey entered hyperspace and jumped to Coruscant. The situation was bad. The Emperor had been abducted by some mysterious means and was en route by shuttle to Zarin's flagship, the ISD Glory. Once again, Marek was asked to join Vader and fly the TIE Defender. This time, literally, to defend the Empire and its leader. Mission briefing. The traitor Zarin has abducted the Emperor and is taking him by shuttle to his star destroyer, Glory. You must find the Emperor's shuttle and disable it. Then protect the Emperor until help arrives and he is returned to safety. You will be flight leader in a 3-ship group of TIE Defenders armed with advanced concussion missiles and a tractor beam. Darth Vader will fly in TD Alpha 4. If he issues any orders, be sure to follow them. As we entered the battle zone, we were directly to the rear of the Emperor's flagship, the ISD Majestic. The ship was in bad shape. Zarin's ISD, Glory, was 18 kilometers away. When all the escort shuttles were destroyed except Haven 3, I ordered my wingmen to attack the Glory, while I turned my attention to disabling the escort shuttle with the Emperor. I didn't want to disable it earlier. It might have been destroyed accidentally during the battle with the other escort shuttles. Once I had Haven 3 disabled, the Mescu arrived to get the Emperor off the escort shuttle. It was about 4 kilometers away. About the same time, the Majestic escaped into hyperspace. Though badly damaged, it managed to escape. About a minute after the arrival of the Mescu, the Vanguard arrived with Vice Admiral Thrawn on board. The Vanguard began launching TIE bombers at about 6 minutes into the mission. As I was finishing the job on Zeta Kappa 2, I got the message that the Mescu had begun boarding operations, and shortly thereafter, the boarding complete message came through. The Emperor was aboard the Mescu. The Emperor was relatively safe now, and it was time to mop up. I targeted the Glory. It was still strong, at 94% shields. My wingmen were all gone, so I decided to join the attack on the Glory alone. I fired all my remaining missiles at laser turrets, turned off my beam weapon, and set all recharge rates to normal. When I got within cannon range, I reset shields and lasers up and set my guns on single fire. I strafed the hull, aiming for gun emplacements. I was trying to get all the guns on one hemisphere, when suddenly the Glory accelerated and sped out into hyperspace. The traitor got away, but for how long? I knew it was only a matter of time. At any rate, that was all I could do, so I entered hyperspace and finished the mission. The Emperor was taken to a secret place, while plans were made to pursue the traitor Zarin. Most of Harkov's forces had been decimated, and the rebels had suffered many losses. In the immediate aftermath of the battle, Marek was all but forgotten. Lord Vader jumped into hyperspace, but did not return to the garret immediately, and for a short time the chaos surrounding first Harkov's, then Zarin's defections had their effect.
Marek did have one visitor, a member of the Emperor's secret order. Stele. The voice was low and conspiratorial. Marek stiffened. "What is it?" "Your service to the Emperor has not gone unnoticed," the hooded man intoned. There was no particular warmth in the voice. "In recognition of that, the Emperor has generously offered to spare your father and return him to your home planet." Marek was speechless, both with relief and with shock. "In return," the envoy continued, "you will continue to serve the Emperor until he or one of his representatives releases you from service." "Is that understood?" He had no real choice, he knew that, but the formality of the question was disturbing. Tired as he was of being the secret order's pawn, he had reason to be grateful to them. Finally, Marek nodded. "I will serve the Emperor, as I always have," he answered solemnly. "Be alert. Your challenges are just beginning, and so are your opportunities." The robed man turned and walked slowly away. Once again, Marek felt as if he had just played a scene in a badly written holodrama. The gathering was grand, and the ceremony was attended by the cream of Coruscant society. The Emperor sat on a high throne, well out of reach of the throng. A buzz of excitement stirred the great hall, and a chill draught made the hair on the back of his neck stand up as Darth Vader walked onto the stage, and a silence fell over the gathering. Marek heard the strange breathing as the Lord of the Sith walked toward him. He stood at attention as the Dark Lord personally pinned the medal on his chest, the highest honor imaginable. "You have done well, Stele. The Emperor is grateful." The man's voice passed through Marek with a wind, and he shuddered involuntarily. Marek's accomplishments were now legendary within the Empire and without. And as he stood there at the height of his military glory, he found himself wondering. Looking around him, he saw only the glitter, the shiny facade. But what was the Empire really about? Was it truly the savior of the galaxy, as he had been taught? Or was it more like Ketcha's gem, hard and brilliant on the outside, but pure poison within? He knew he was searching for meaning in a world of rigid rules and ideals. His dreams of late had been populated with the central figures of his life. He dreamed of friends and enemies, traitors and loyalists, of rebels and, often, of home. He felt Lord Vader's gaze upon him. He felt the gathering watching him. Droid-like, Marek saluted, and there was a satisfied murmur all around. But inside, he was thinking of home, of Quan and his family. But it was a long time before he was to see Quan again. A long time, and many adventures later.